Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Audit and Governance Committee. Before we start proceedings, may I bring to your attention some housekeeping matters. There's no expected fire alarm today, so if it sounds, please follow the signs to the nearest fire exit and meet at the assembly point in Civic Square. Please can I ask that you use your microphone when addressing the meeting and that it is switched off when not using it. Your mobile devices should be turned to silent, and the meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and capable of subsequent repeated viewing. By entering the Warspite room and during the course of the meeting, councillors are consented to being filmed and to the use of these recordings for the webcast. So first of all, item 1 on the agenda is apologies. Do we have any today?
Yep, through you, Chair. Councillor Nicholson has given us his apologies, and so has Councillor Cudahy and Councillor Bill Stevens is substituting.
Thank you, and welcome back, Councillor Stevens. Item number 2 is declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda? Mrs. Benny.
Yes, there was just one, and I'm just trying to look for the actual one. I'll declare it when it happens. It's a question that I wanted to raise on one of the reports, but it's in relation to me as a non-exec director of LiveWell and the link to adult social care. So I just wanted to be clear about that because I'll be asking a question linked to one of the plans in there, and there could be a perceived conflict.
Okay, thank you for bringing that to attention, and we have noted that accordingly. Item 3 is the minutes, and this is to approve the minutes of the last Audit and Governance Committee held on 1st of April 2025. Are members happy to agree these as a true and accurate record? Excellent, thank you. Next item is Chair's urgent business, and I don't believe we have any today. So item 5, role of an audit member, and this is over to Barry Morris from Grant Thornton. I believe you're going to give us a verbal report on this.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just to introduce myself, I'm Barry Morris. I'm the key audit partner from Grant Thornton, and I've taken over from Jackson Murray to oversee the delivery of the audit for 24-25. So I suppose I want to start off by saying the Audit Committee is a really, really important committee from the perspective of the governance and the overall making sure that the council conducts itself in an appropriate way. And it has that key role in the scrutiny of those governance arrangements that are in place from all of the contributors, so from external auditors, from internal auditors, and from your counter-fraud team as well. And really your role as members is to ask good, challenging questions. Don't be fobbed off by an answer that's not addressing the query that you have. We're looking to use your experience, and that's the benefit that you bring to this committee. So I always like to say there's no stupid questions, but there can be some stupid answers. So just try and bear that in mind. And therefore make sure you do get that answer that you're really looking for. It is also being satisfied that you're comfortable that the actions of management are in line with what you would expect them to be. Again, if the auditors have raised a recommendation and management have come up with a response which either doesn't fully address the recommendation or perhaps disagrees with that, you need to make sure that you're comfortable that management are putting the best interests of the council in front of themselves. One of the key roles to be really effective as an audit committee member is as soon as you walk through the door, your political party is left outside. So we shouldn't know what political party you represent. It's really, that's not really the role of this committee. There's plenty of other committees for you to do that. So being apolitical is really important. I think it's also keen to emphasise that the work that this committee does is really technical, and there's lots of technical terms. I know you'll look at the statement of accounts, and possibly a good read for insomnia and a cure for insomnia, but do make sure that you go through and ask questions. If there's things that you don't understand, make sure that you've got that understanding, and that as auditors, both ourselves and internal audit can respond to that. And it's really important against that legislative overview that we've got in place. We can often make technical adjustments. So again, it is quite complex, the world of public sector accounting. So we follow the rules that have been put in place by the International Financial Reporting Standards, and David will go through those when we go through the audit plan in a couple of moments' time. And then the SIPFA code overrides some of those so that it reduces the impact on the council tax. So again, I just emphasise, don't be concerned about asking questions to us as the auditors to make sure that we provide you the information that you need, and also so that we provide you with the assurance that you need in terms of what you're signing off as those charged with governance. So again, that's really important. Those organisations where it has gone wrong are typically those where there's been that lack of scrutiny and that lack of governance oversight. So again, I would just urge you to make sure that you know what your role is. We are always here to help and offer guidance again through the audit committee. We're happy to have private meetings with audit committee members without officers' presence. That's recognised as good practice. So we can do that periodically as well. But happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Barry. Does anyone have any comments or questions for Barry? Councillor Stevens.
Thanks. I totally get all the points that are being made and the logic behind them. I think we do need to be very careful with this term non-political. I'm on this panel, or this committee, excuse me, because I'm a politician, for no other reason. And I think there are extremes, Chair, that we need to avoid. Clearly, I'm not here to ask questions on behalf of the party I represent on the council, but I'm only here because of that. So I think there's a balance somewhere in the middle to be struck, and it is difficult. I know, and I don't think Barry. I think everyone gets Barry's intention and motivations in saying what you said. I just don't. Sometimes I don't appreciate this sense of, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Politician, we're going to put you on that, but don't be political. Don't be that everything I do in this building is political. Sometimes it's in a very partisan way on behalf of the Labour Party. Sometimes it isn't. This is one of the cases when it isn't, but that doesn't stop me being political and bringing whatever political ability I may or may not have, and that's for others to judge. That's what I bring. So I'm not a trained accountant or anything remote. What I do have is the mandate of the people of my ward, same as the rest of us. So I think there is a way of being political without being partisan, if I can put it in those terms, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Barry, did you want to come back on that?
Love to.
What you've said is absolutely right. So it's not about not being political, apolitical. It's about keeping those partisan behaviours outside. There are plenty of other opportunities, hopefully, for you to debate political differences in council, in scrutiny, and all the rest of it. Again, it's just recognising the role of that committee. But you're absolutely right. You are here to represent the people of the ward that you represent, and it's that lived experience that you need to be bringing into this chamber.
Any further questions or comments? No? Okay, then we'll move on to item 6, which is also Barry from Grant Thornton, and this is the Plymouth City Council audit plan for 2024 to 25.
Thank you, Chair. For the sake of variety, I'll let David take this report.
Thank you, Barry. So members will be aware, as part of our annual audit cycle, there are a number of key documents that we bring to this committee in order to inform them about the work that we're doing for the year on the financial statements. The first of these being the audit plan, which is here before you. I I won't go through it in line by line, but there are some key pieces to pick out, which I'll go through as we continue. So page 8 of the pack, page 4 of the reports, sets out some of our considerations on local government reorganisation. Members will see there is an update on page 9 in regards to the current proposal, with the 28th of November still being the ultimate deadline for all 4 proposals. As it says here, members will also be aware that the original statement and briefing and idea was that the new council boundaries would have targets of 500,000 people within them. Given the geographical makeup of the country, that's not always going to be the most applicable or most convenient, reasonable sort of size. And I think in the update, the Minister for Local Government, Jim McMahon, has said that whilst the stated objective was 500,000, where the case is made and is reasonable, it is not a hard and fast rule. Devon, Plymouth and Torbay have submitted their proposals, and the government has subsequently made 7.6 million available. There is a formula to that, which I believe is a flat rate plus 20p per person, which is roughly 380,000 to be split between the various participants within Devon, Torbay and Plymouth. Continuing on to, in sort of lockstep with that, and also probably long overdue, is the reform of local audit. On page 10, you'll see the proposal to set a new local audit office with a number of responsibilities, including contract management, which they would take over from PSAA, under which the previous audit contract was awarded. Those who have been involved in audit for a while may notice a number of similarities between the proposed new local audit office and the previously defunct audit commission. But that is not for me to make any further comment on that, I don't think. And then below that, in terms of what we can do, or what the proposals from things such as the Redmond review, and it is in lockstep with the above, is to look at the overall of the local audit system and how that work is done. Plymouth is one of those audits that has been particularly hit by the backstop and sort of issues within the audit market, and we as an audit firm, and I'm sure the local government market, does not want to come back to that position. So we continue to work with the various bodies in order to give our opinion on how best we feel these reforms and processes can be managed. Moving on to page 14. The big update for accounts in 24-25 is the IFRS 16 leases. They are new and came into force from the 1st of April 2024 after a couple of postponements. The introduction sets out some of the more technical IFRS 16 issues in terms of what the accounting arrangements are and what it means. Probably of more interest is the systems and processes. That is more of where our focus will be, in terms of making sure that the processes that management have put in place are appropriate, and that the disclosures within the financial statements are accurate and appropriate as well. It is a new area, and therefore it is one that we will provide more scrutiny for, but we will continue to update members on any issues, having had those discussions with management. We do say on page 15 that we will set up meetings with various members of the council, including the chief exec and chair of the committee and the section 151 officer. We did have a meeting quite recently in July. So just to give members again that assurance that these aren't just words, we are actually following through with what we say. Page 16, probably another area that we don't want to visit but continues to loom large, is the backstop. There is another backstop for 24-25. All accounts, as it says here, must be signed by the 27th of February 2026. You'll note that we have recorded the position that the council was in terms of 22-23 and 21-22 as well, in terms of why we had to we backstop those, and therefore because we were unable to gain assurance over the opening balances, that led to the disclaimed opinion in 24-25. Again, another area where we are all working ourselves, management in Carolyn et al, to gain reassurance over these opening balances. We continue to work with the market, and the leaders in the market, such as the FRC, the NAO, on how we are going to get that assurance. And again, we will keep members informed in terms of what that means for the 24-25 audit opinion. The next area to look at is page 21 onwards. So these are where we lay out our significant risks. These are the areas that we will pay more attention to. These are the areas that we consider have a higher risk of what we call material misstatement, i.e. the largest errors that impact directly on the primary statements, being the balance sheet, I&E, etc. As a general rule, these tend to be those areas where the accounts or the financial position could be manipulated, such as journals, but also those areas that are subject to the highest level of estimation and have a number of assumptions built into them. For example, asset valuation. So as a general rule, those are significant risks, and members will see we've got management override of journals, and then valuation of land and buildings, investment properties, and the pension fund. The revenue cycle and expenditure cycles are mandatory risks. There is an assumed risk in these areas, but as members can see, we have made an assessment that we do not consider these to be a significant risk for Plymouth City Council, but we will do a large amount of work in those areas to gain assurances over the transactions. As signalled earlier on page 26, we are doing specific work around the remeasurement of lease and right of use assets through IFRS 16. The PFI liability also comes into that, and as you can see, it is a large figure. But again, we are at the discussion stage with management in terms of their disclosures in the accounts, and we will work to gain assurance over the coming months. Moving on to page 31, materiality. This is the amount over which we will make management adjust the accounts. So any errors we find that are above 10.4 million will require a change to the accounts. Anything over 6.7 million will require a conversation, and we will report anything over 520,000 to members as part of our audit reporting. We have made, I say concession, that's the wrong word. We recognise that the 23-24 audit was subject to the backstop arrangements and therefore wasn't complete until the back end of February. As we said here, we have identified a number of recommendations from that, but given the timings and allowing management time to address those, as Barry sort of said before, so that they can provide full assurance to you that those actions are being fully addressed. We haven't followed those up at this point. That will be part of our work over the coming weeks, and then we will report that in future audit committees. The second element of our statutory requirements is from page 36 onwards, which is the value for money. Again, as from page 39, you will see the 23-24 judgment, which members will have seen in the annual audit report last year. There are two significant risks in financial sustainability and a further significant weakness in improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. Therefore, our judgments in terms of what we believe will be a risk of significant weakness in 24-25 are driven by those 23-24 judgments and our continued work with the council. Therefore, you will see we have at this point flagged those risks that we identified, those significant weaknesses continue to exist. Again, probably as a result of the timing and giving management sufficient time to address those. But again, we will look at that as part of our work in terms of going forward in 24-25. Other than that, there's a few other little pieces. Page 42, we are still committed to getting this work done by the end of December 2025 to allow us all to get back on a reasonable timeline and to, quite frankly, give some of the finance team a break after 3 or 4 years of hard slog through a number of accounts that we've been doing. But again, and I will repeat this because it bears repeating, we will, if anything slips or changes, we will continue to keep members updated. On page 40, no, apologies, page 43 of the pack, just our pictures in case you forget who we are between audit committee meetings. And then finally, on page, sorry, it's towards the back end of the report, in the delivering audit quality. So again, having had the conversations about the backstop and wanting to provide further assurance to the teams, to the members, sorry, we are continuing to pay close attention to our audit quality. We believe it is a point of difference for us within Grant Thornton, as shown on page 58, where you will see from the recent FRC audit quality inspection, every Grant Thornton file that was reviewed was good or had limited improvements required, which was the only provider within the market. So again, you know, that alongside the fact that we delivered a higher percentage of audit opinions than any other firm, again, we're just demonstrating that we are continuing to look to provide that quality and provide assurance and rebuild that assurance back for your accounts. I will stop there, but I'm quite happy to take any questions on what I've said or anything else in the report.
Thank you. So I've got Councillor Rainsford and then Councillor Finn.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation, which was actually very clear to a non-accountant and fairly easy to read. However, I would welcome some clarification. It's partly to do with the sort of two-way relationship between yourselves and the local authority. Significant risks section. There are a lot of, from your perspective, saying we will do certain things. Can I ask how that we will is checked, your list of things you're going to do? How do we know that you have done that? Is it simply a conversation between yourself and officers, or perhaps do our officers seek to have a sort of checklist of against your advice and the things you're committed to looking at?
So it's a fair question. It's a fair challenge. I suppose those areas that we've said we will do are those areas that are required by the standards. So in order for us to be able to provide you with a quote unquote a safe opinion, we have to cover those areas because the standards require that we do a certain amount of work in order to gain assurance over balances and disclosures within financial statements. In terms of that checklist and how do you know we've done it? I mean, we will report that we've done it. Again, that's marking your own homework, I appreciate. But as I say, the FRC at the moment, although the local audit reform will potentially change this, but at the moment the FRC review a number of our files, and they will take the plan and they will take the work done on the file and they will check the two against each other to say, well, you said you were going to do this, where have you done this? And therefore we get marked on that in terms of whether we have met the requirements of the standards.
And that's a random selection, is it?
Yeah, so just to confirm, so as David said, we report to you what we will do. In our audit findings report that comes at the end of the audit, it says what we will do and what we have done and what the outcomes of those investigations are and those inquiries are. So the two are there. In terms of your last question around how do the FRC or how do the internal quality arrangements work? So we have both internal quality file reviews. So every engagement lead or key audit partner is reviewed every year by an internal quality review to the same standards as an external quality review. That's picked completely randomly. I actually head the audit quality team, but my review was therefore selected by somebody else, so I can't influence what I'm being picked for. And then the FRC will undertake its own programme of reviews, and again, those are picked. I won't say randomly. They have a selection criteria that they don't really share, because otherwise we'd guess what they're doing.
No, thank you, Chair. I mean, that's actually reassuring because it means if you're being checked, then obviously our work is being checked, and that's reassuring for the public. Thank you.
Councillor Finn.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Barry. I suppose it comes back to risks. We've been constantly told over numerous years, and it's been said in this committee as well, that the pension transaction wasn't linked to the hedging instrument. A document's come to light, and it's page 42 of a pack that was presented to this committee of 224 in October 21. And one of the statements I'd like be grateful if you could clear up. Obviously, this is written by Grant Thornton. This council entered into a hedging arrangement in April 2020. This was linked to the previous year's pension liability payment and is to the value of 72 million, which to many is quite clear. So the question I would ask is, how is that linked? And have we as a committee been misled by saying that the pension transaction isn't linked? Now, we take it a bit further because what we're worried about is it presented to councillors on the 24th of February this year when we set the budget committee.
Sorry,
there was a
Councillor
statement-
Finn, I'm not sure this is relevant to this part of the agenda.
It is, because I'd like to, because it's written by the auditor. I'm just asking the auditor with regard to the risk of this statement. And I think it comes back to what we were presented to on the 24th when we set the budget in this council. And what it says, the drawdown of usable reserves and the release of the working balance. So there is an effect here. We know from the Treasury management officials, should the interest rate swap fail, there's a £35 million liability, which brings me on to basically part two. The document that was presented to us councillors on the 24th, to which we all voted on in the council chamber, was obviously the capitalisation would be forthcoming, and we were categorically told in that meeting within the next couple of weeks. We haven't got that capitalisation yet. So I question, how could we set a 25-26 legal budget without the capitalisation? As we are some 5 months post-budget, set without a capitalisation, when are we going to be, is it a possibility of being presented with an alternative budget? And I draw that...
Councillor Finn, this is about the audit plan. This isn't
Yes.
about the
So
previous budget or the pension transaction.
it's not about the previous, but it's talking about the risk that we were talking about just now. Obviously, this is a risk to us setting the budget, and it would have to be reflected in an audit plan. So if you could just answer a couple of those points, it would just be much appreciated, just to how we would be affected. Because what it was clear within the council papers and the budget set by the council was, without a capitalisation direction from HH, there will be a requirement to expense the pension deficit, which obviously is a huge risk to this authority. So we're just talking about it under risks.
So I'll take the first part, and I'll look to officers to see if they'd like to come in and make comments around the 25-26 budget setting process, because again, that's not subject to our review. The conclusion of our work in relation to the pension transaction has been reported through to this audit committee on a number of occasions. You're correct in saying that it's subject to capitalisation direction that is yet to be determined. That's outside of our hands. The council has made representations. Again, officers will be able to provide an update on that. From our perspective, it's about, and as set out in our audit plan, we need to make sure that the accounts are prepared on a true and fair basis. And that was an example where we had concerns over the underlying transaction and the accounting treatment for that, which is why we brought it to your attention as members, and we didn't sign off the audit opinion until the satisfactory resolution was obtained. I'm not sure if officers would like to come in on other comments.
Through you, Chair. In terms of where we are, the latter question in terms of capitalisation direction, the situation has remained unchanged in that you're correct, we haven't had that letter issued. We have stayed in close consultation with MHCLG as they progress through what is their process rather than ours. I can confirm we have, to their satisfaction, answered any questions. I had it confirmed this end of last week, as I was hoping to come into this room with final resolution that there are no outstanding questions. And it is a matter of engagement with MHCLG and, in fact, Home Office's Treasury as well as the process they have to follow, in that normally capitalisation direction would also have financial implications, which ours doesn't, but it's a complex process they are trying to resolve. So, as I say, they are satisfied at this point that all questions that I have been given have been answered, and I think it is a matter of process. So as it stands in terms of where we are in the budget that you referred to, the situation hasn't changed when we were able to satisfy ourselves that that budget could be legally set for my predecessor at that point in time.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Finn, do you have a supplementary?
It's just reference, was the pension transaction linked to the interest rate swap? And in what context of that statement?
Through you, Chair, I'm not sure many of us in this room can quote that exact extract, and maybe coming back on that exact is something we could do after this meeting, because I think in terms of the two transactions, they are, from any of my experience and limited time here, they are in no way linked, but I'm not going to predetermine the response to that sentence that you pulled out. So I think we will have to take that away and read it in the context of that document and come back to you with a response.
If you could, it'd be much appreciated. Thank you for your reply.
Thank you. Mrs. Benny.
Yep, thank you. It was really just a check-in, in the sense of it obviously feels a very tight timeline in terms of delivering the audit. A sense of, do you have access to everything that you need to enable you to deliver it? I notice there's an escalation process in the document, should there be issues, but what's the general feel?
I think the simple answer is yes. So I sort of been down here all day, had a meeting with Carolyn earlier today in order to just sort of have a look and work through some of the timelines for the 24-25 audit. We are aware that the timelines are tight and that we're looking to get the work completed by the end of the financial year. To that end, we are looking to bring forward some of our work that would require input from management to allow them time to address it, get together some of the documentation so that we can hit the ground running. We're also looking at being more on site, because we find that to be more efficient. And I think we've said it, a number of audits, and the escalation process is part of that, is that we don't just sort of turn up once a month or at these audit committees. We do have weekly meetings, so myself and Carolyn will have weekly meetings through the whole process, through the whole of the audit, in order to make sure that we are aware of the issues, that they are aware of the issues, that we are all working to address any timelines, and that should anything come up that creates a delay or causes us, potentially means a slippage in what we're aiming for, that we are aware of it and we can work with it. So like I say, the answer is yes, and there is a lot that goes on in the background in terms of us working with management to endeavour to get to that December timeframe.
Thank you. Councillor Sproston.
Yeah, I think my question's been answered by default here. As a new member of the panel, I'm kind of taking you up on your no stupid questions here. But essentially, I just wanted to ask about when significant weaknesses are identified, are these kind of given to the kind of council leads straight away in order to try and rectify those defects? Because for me, any significant weakness I'd want to have addressed as soon as possible. Now, you mentioned you had kind of weekly meetings, etc. And for me, whilst it's great to have a fantastic detailed report, any kind of weaknesses I would identified is something I would be really keen on everyone to get cracking on straight away. So does that happen, or is it just more of a the report is the report and then it's action from there?
Thank you. So a really great question. So there's a couple of mechanisms for that. So the audit plan sets out those areas where we believe there's a risk of a significant weakness. So that's not necessarily saying there is a significant weakness there, but the underlying arrangements at the council give us areas where we particularly want to focus to see whether or not appropriate arrangements are in place. So again, that's flagged as part of the preparation of the audit plan. You know where we're going to be focusing our work, and the evidence will be being pulled together and provided to us to ensure that appropriate arrangements are not in place. Should we identify that those arrangements are not in place, then officers will be aware of that from the questions that we're raising and through the drafting process of the auditor's annual report. So it's definitely not a case of here's our report at the end of the year. There will be an iterative process. Of course, there may be other things that arise as we undertake our work. So it's not just focused on those areas of risk of significant weakness, but across a whole range of different criteria that we look at, which has been mandated by the National Audit Office. Again, where those things start to become bubble to the surface, then again, officers will be made aware of that. So that's why we want to make sure that when we bring the final auditor's annual report to you, then actually management have had good opportunity to go through that and identify what their actions are going to be. And indeed, sometimes there can be a delay in the work being undertaken and then the report finally coming to audit committee. So again, they will have that notice at the earliest possible opportunity.
Any further questions or comments on this item? Okay, thank you, David. Thank you, Barry. We'll now move on to item 6 of the agenda, item 7 even, which is the internal audit end of year report for 2024-2025. This is over to Louise. We'll have seen the report under item 21 on the agenda. It does contain commercially confidential information. Does anyone wish to ask questions about the Part 2 report? Because if so, we will then have the Part 1 public meeting and then go into a Part 2 after that. No? Okay. So Louise, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. The internal audit end of year report for 24-25 on page 69 of your reports pack summarises the work undertaken by Devon Assurance Partnership and provides an overall opinion on the adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's internal control environment. The public sector internal audit standards and global internal audit standards that came into force from the 1st of April 2025 require that the Chief Internal Auditor provide an annual report providing an opinion that can be used by the organisation to inform its governance statement. The Audit Committee, under its terms of reference, is required to consider the Chief Internal Auditor's annual report. Our report and appendices set out the background to the audit service provision, any updates to the agreed plan, a review of work undertaken in 24-25 and provides our opinion on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the authority's internal control environment. Based on the work completed during the year, the Chief Internal Auditor has given an assurance opinion of reasonable assurance. This is set out on page 71 of the report. This reflects that while generally sound systems of governance, risk management and control are in place, some areas for improvement have been identified. Details to support the basis for this opinion are set out on pages 72 and 73, along with the results of all audit work undertaken set out in Appendix 1 on page 79. We have for the first time also included as an additional paper on page 109 an assurance map for the audit work completed in 24-25, which provides a visible representation of the assurance results. Page 74 of our report highlights audit coverage across strategic risks and corporate objectives, and page 75 reports our audit performance against the audit plan. We delivered 90% of the revised audit plan, with assurance work accounting for 85% of our activity. Of the assurance opinions issued, 86% were of reasonable or substantial assurance, with no assurance opinions issued. That would leave 14% of our audits with limited assurance. We have continued to monitor and report on the implementation of agreed management actions. The Council has made notable progress in addressing management actions arising from internal audits with limited assurance ratings. As of the 31st of March 2025, the number of audits with outstanding management action was 10 compared to 15 at the end of the 31st of March 24. 7 audits have fully implemented all management actions and have been removed during 24-25, reflecting a positive downward trend. The latest management action report to the end of Q4 24-25 is included as an additional paper to this report on page 111. Committee should note that details of one audit area has been included under Part 2 due to sensitivity, which the Chair mentioned as we went into this item. The committee are also asked to note the Devon Assurance Partnership continues to conform with the public sector internal audit standards and has been externally assessed as generally conform, which is the highest rating, details of which are set out in Appendix 2 on page 101. The internal audit end-of-year report provides assurance that the Council's internal control framework is operating effectively overall, and the findings have informed the annual governance statement. Areas for improvement have been identified and are being addressed through action plans and ongoing audit work. I'm happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you, Louise. Any comments or questions? Councillor Rainsford.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple in different areas, but I'll do one, let somebody else come in and have a further think about it. Can I ask, the management action tracking, obviously quite significant improvement there, so congratulations to the team for that. I'm sort of interested in trying to understand the type of the reasons for the delays for those that are 90 days plus, and what is the longest? How far delayed is the longest one of those, please?
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. With regards to the longest days, some of them are delayed because of significant control changes. So, for example, probably the best one to explain would be things to do with client financial services, where we've got an Eclipse system that's been introduced for social services management, but the financial module still sits within the Care First system, which hasn't been upgraded yet. So sometimes those management actions require the new module to be brought in, which is planned within the next 12 months, hopefully. So those are items where they've been delayed. And I can give you details of actually how long they've been outstanding for. And sometimes they can be a little while, but that is all down to the basis for how long it takes to get a simpler system implemented. Others could be down to getting a strategy written and published, which sometimes can take a while to get to grips with and actually go through the cycle of requirements to get that online. So there are some areas where they are stubborn at management actions, but the corporate management team are thoroughly aware of what's happening with those management actions, and we do have those discussions, and likewise I have the discussions regularly with the Section 151. So I am able to provide you with the further details, but generally speaking, the really difficult ones are the ones that are requiring those real big changes, which do take time to implement.
Thank you. It's really important to understand that for people listening in, to understand that, most of the work you're doing is where it should be, but there are pretty good reasons, obviously, and we'll get some more information on that for any delays. So thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Benny.
Thank you. It was just a quick question, Louise, around page 74 of the pack and the two charts, charts 4 and 5. And I was just interested to understand how those percentages are, because there's a bit for me around, in my career, there's something around service improvement, and when you focus on quality, actually the costs are driven down and you lose your waste. What really struck me with chart 5 was actually we've only got 15% in terms of what's purely said providing quality public services, and yet we've got quite a big chunk around the focus on the money, and it felt an imbalance, but I don't know how these have been created, so I didn't feel as if I got them, if I'm honest. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Absolutely, no, and that's absolutely fine. So what we do with regards to our audit work, we have our plan, which obviously comes to audit committee, and we agree that plan. That plan's drawn up based on risks and objectives, obviously conversations with strategic directors and the corporate management team. So we do have that plan set in place. Then what we need to do, and this can be, I suppose, down to my interpretation sometimes. So a lot of the work that we do will be cross-cutting. So, for example, if we were to look at a lot of the work that we do would be across adult social care, children's services. Some of the audits predominantly have a financial basis. So, for example, debt management, income collection, but it doesn't mean that it negates some of the other areas for which those areas are involved. For example, keeping children safe, making sure that people stay healthy, and sort of those supporting services. So it's an interpretation of where I see that the actual audit work that we've done sits best. So although it will cross over a number of areas, this is the predominant area, if that makes sense. And it's based on the time we spend on those particular risk areas. So on our audit tracking information, how much time is spent on different audits within those particular objectives or risks, if you're looking at the risk section.
Could I just ask just a supplementary question? So with that in mind, have you got a sense of whether any of those pie slices should increase over the next year? Or maybe I'm putting you on the spot and actually it's not fair.
No, absolutely. So for myself, obviously, spending money wisely is a big one. Quite often, the spending money wisely is looking at spending, where sometimes I think looking at sort of income is also quite a major risk. But I think the sort of objectives and the risk sometimes don't reflect that so clearly, but obviously it does get caught up in the spending money wisely, because that's the financial one. So that's the biggest risk for the authority. There are some other areas, again, adult social care is usually a big one, just because of the size of that service and also the risks associated with it, and equally children's services as well. What we need to be mindful of is these services also go through other scrutiny, external inspections, so we have to balance off what we do so they have the capacity to function as a service whilst having a balance of inspections and scrutiny. So I'll address that as we work through the year as part of the planning, to make sure that we have the coverage there. Ideally, from an internal audit perspective, I'd always like to do lots of everything, and so, you know, but obviously I need to be mindful of the council, its pressures, the risks, and its objectives.
Does anyone else have any comment? Councillor Rainsford?
Thank you, Chair. Adult social care debt management, that particular section. One of the concerns that is raised in there is that recovering of debt can be complex due to factors such as the involvement of other departments. I mean, I understand issues about the absence of legal framework for individuals, but can you talk us through or explain the problems faced by working with other departments, other than obviously they're in different places and doing different things, but is there something we should learn from that? Is there any work going on to improve how those interdepartmental relationships work to make this more efficient?
Thank you, through you, Chair. So yes, it is extremely complex. Both children's services and adult services in particular are very complex, multiple teams across multiple service areas, and as an audit team, it's quite difficult to unpick the workings around that. We have services working within adult social care, children's social care. We also have business support teams, we have finance teams, and sometimes there's multiple systems as well. So we have an Eclipse system, we have Care First still at the moment, so that's 2 systems. We also have our civical financial systems. Then we also have our systems, for example, if you've got Send for our children's services, and then we would have other systems for adult social services, our deprivation of liberty safeguarding and things like that. So there's multiple systems. Sometimes these systems don't talk to each other very well, so we've got lots of information in a lot of places. So just trying to streamline that, it causes difficulties. The new projects, like with the Eclipse system, is looking to take that on, and there's a good team in place that are trying to raise the standards, bring everybody together. And I will say, with regards to the adult social care debt management, they do have, and it's been running since this report came out, an adult social care debt board, which Audit attend. That's been chaired with the head of adult social care retained client, but is now going forward going to be chaired by the strategic director of adult social care, health and communities, to ensure that the momentum with regards to that, and we are constantly looking at, as a board, on how we can sort of tackle that, identifying the high risk cases so that we can actually put steps in place, again with our legal colleagues as well, is another area with which we work, again party to that board, to make sure that we actually do that in the most effective way that we can.
And a quick supplementary, you've got better care finance system coming in. When is that expected to start? And I assume that'll help.
My latest update was that was coming in from September, and I've not been told any different to that. So it was slightly delayed. I think it was due in June, but it's now September. And we do have that in the plan this year to make sure that the benefits of that system are sort of with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for Louise on this report? Excellent. Thank you, Louise. We'll move on to item 8 now, which is the Counter Fraud Service Annual Report for 2024-25. And Tony, you're our interim replacement for Ken, who was doing this for years. So welcome to the Audit and Governance Committee, and over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, as noted, I think first thing to draw attention to, page 121, Ken Johnson has now retired from the partnership and a stalwart of counter fraud. Behind me and to my right, as I'm sat, is one of the team, Peter Burgoyne, for a wave there, who's been instrumental in making sure that the activity undertaken has continued to the standard it has. Within the report, hopefully it's familiar to the committee that the format essentially has not changed too much. But some points just to draw out, if I may, are just around section 1.2 in the executive summary on page 122, where there's some headlines around some of the work that the team have been undertaking in that. And as always, we are cautious about the outcomes and the other aspects of this because we are in a public meeting, but we want to give a flavour of the kind of work that's being undertaken. So that's within that section. Actually jumping quite through, I think the next one to just draw out is on page 124, section 7.2. So the new failure to prevent fraud offence does come into effect in September, and we'll be working with the authority to update the relevant counter fraud and associated policies on that one. The requirements for an entity to fall under that offence will be met by Plymouth. They are around number of people, income, and there are others in that. And as an authority, Plymouth does meet those. So that's one. And I think really the aim of this, and the thing that, if I can refer back to Ken, even though he's not here, section 8 on that same page 124, where we talk about the outcomes of the work. And I think this is the really important bit. The team do work tirelessly, really, to make sure that the work that they do has an impact on the authority. We talk about two kinds of savings, cashable and non-cashable. The cashable is simply as it is. That is the cash that is assigned to some of this work. The non-cashable is where it's a little bit harder to understand the financial impact, but ultimately what that does is take normally estimates from the Cabinet Office and associate a value to each particular type of activity. And I think underpinning that is the support from Plymouth City Council that has continued to be really proactive and take that approach to fraud to make sure that it is investigated as it moves forward. The remainder of the pages are for information and have other detail, but I didn't want to draw more on than that, Chair.
Thank you, Tony. Any questions, comments on that? No? Okay, thank you very much, Tony and Peter. And we'll now move on. So the recommendation is to note that report, which committee are happy to do. So we'll now move on to item 9, draft statement of accounts for 2024-25. Caroline, I believe this is you.
Thank you, Chair. The team produced the statement of accounts by the statutory deadline of the 30th of June this year. And as background, obviously some of you were involved in the production or the signing off of 5 years of accounts, which we had to manage last year. So it was quite refreshing this year to just have 1 year to produce and to know that hopefully we will only have possibly 1 year to adjust for. Obviously the backstop, there was new government legislation introduced on the 30th of September, the Accounts and Audit Amendment Regulations, which have set a revised reporting timetable. And David Johnson mentioned that we will have to get the audited accounts signed off by the 27th of February 26. So that's the deadline that we're working with the external auditors to achieve. A point to mention is point 4, which is on page 250, which is my report. The introduction of IFRS 16 leases was quite a major implementation for us to work on this year. This introduces a concept of a right of use asset for all qualifying leases, including those with nominal or peppercorn rents. The approach eliminates the previous distinction between finance and operating leases for lessees. Under IFRS 16, all leases, except those with a term of less than 12 months or of a low value, are recognised on the balance sheet regardless of the transfer of risks and rewards. So to complement the new standard, we've updated our accounting policies within the Statement of Accounts. The revised policy replaces the previous lease accounting guidance and is detailed under Accounting Policy 1.19, which is on page 40 of the Statement of Accounts. In preparation for the implementation date of the 1st of April 24, we conducted a comprehensive review of all lease arrangements. As a result, 59 land and building leases, 32 equipment leases and 8 vehicle leases were identified for recognition on the balance sheet. These leases were previously treated as operating leases and expensed through the Comprehensive Income and Expenditure Statement. We also reviewed our private finance initiative lease models in consultation with our Treasury Management Advisors, Arlene Close, to assess the impact of IFRS 16. So we currently have 2 PFI contracts, one for schools and one for the energy from waste facility. The outcome of the review of these models produced a net reduction of 10.8985 in the balance sheet of PFI related assets and liabilities. The adoption of IFRS 16 also affects the Council's prudential indicators, which impacts on Wendy's treasury management. The recognition of right of use assets and corresponding lease liabilities increases the Council's reported borrowings, which in turn raises the capital financing requirement and the authorised debt limits. This is purely a book exercise, so it doesn't mean that we've had to borrow any new money. It's just we're converting the rents that we've paid through the accounts into an asset and recognising minimum revenue provision through the accounts for that. In terms of the draft statement of accounts, we're working hard to ensure that we work with our auditors, and there's a summary of some of the major movements on the balance sheet, which are on under point 5 of the draft statement of accounts, point 5.5. The Council has a positive balance sheet as at the 31st of March 25, which means that the Council's assets are 435 million greater than its liabilities. This reflects a downward movement of 40 million from 23-24 due to various movements in the Council's assets and liabilities. You can see that there's been some movement in the property, plant and equipment assets. They've increased by 61 million, primarily due to a combination of asset revaluation and acquisition of new assets through the capital programme. And in all of this document, I've referred you to the notes in the accounts so that you can see the detail. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Carolyn. Any questions for Carolyn? Councillor Finn.
Hi there, Carolyn. When you talked about the PFI debt, we know in the accounts the last few years it's gone from 100 to 250 million. Is that it now? Has it sort of reached its plateau?
Apologies, Chair. The PFIs has remained fairly constant, and that I did allude to in the report. The net movement for the movement of IFRS 16 is only 11 million, so it's a fairly static. It's being repaid annually, so over the life of the contract it will be repaid, so there's been no increase as such.
No, but when we talk about it as an overall debt, regard to borrowing in the year-end figures,
The PFI is fairly static, it's actually reduced.
yeah, we did notice it had gone from 100 to 200 odd million when it was presented to us in February.
Sorry, I'm just trying to. What page is that? 33.
Not too worried about the figures. It's just is that it now?
The energy from waste is 140 million, and the schools is 40. Is it? No, sorry. It's 17. No, sorry, 56 rather. Apologies. You put me on the spot with a question specifically on this.
That's okay. You can always come back to us on that one.
Yeah.
It was just to know whether that was it for sort of the financing now, as it took that extra stage towards the year end.
We haven't taken out
Ian,
any.
did you want to come?
Sorry.
No. Through you, Chair. I was just going to say, the team have undertaken that exercise through IFRS 16, so have done a forensic view, I would call it, in fact, of that contractual arrangement. So whatever the accounting journey may have been, it is a true representation, therefore, at this point of the liabilities if you've got presented in the accounts, and yes, they will be discounted now as those cash flows flow through. So no, there won't be any growth. That is a representation of the asset and then the corresponding lease liability that has to sit there and will be paid as cash flows paid.
There is no impact on the council taxpayer in terms of increased borrowing or interest. It's purely an accounting adjustment.
Okay, thank you for that. Does that clarify things, Councillor?
Yeah, just that one. Devolution, how did Plymouth's overtures go with regard to the 13 neighbouring parishes?
That has no relevance to the statement of accounts, I'm afraid. No, that was purely context, but it doesn't, because we're reporting back on 24-25, the narrative report which you're referring to is just setting a bit of context about what's going on within the council, looking back and looking forwards. But it's not a reflection, or it shouldn't be taken into account in terms of looking at what's going to happen in LGR. It's just purely a comment on something that is impacting on the council going forwards.
Okay, so last question is, obviously one of the biggest things that are going to be affecting us going forward is the send problems. Is mitigation in place for when that comes on book next March?
I'm not sure what you're referring to in terms of, because at the moment we have a statutory override for the dedicated schools grant. So at the moment our dedicated schools grant at year end was about 18 million. So it had increased by 14 in the year 24-25. But the government hasn't announced any, it's obviously reviewing what's going to, but this is a national issue affecting probably every council that has the dedicated schools grant in the country. I'll pass to Ian.
No, sorry.
Shall I go? As part of the spending review and then subsequently through the fair funding review, the government have announced that statutory override will be extended for 2 years. The autumn white paper on send reform will address the government's position on how they will resolve the DSG and the high needs block in terms of next steps, and we continue to work closely with colleagues internally around our internal mitigation plans around managing those costs. Yes, so but the key headlines here is the statutory override has been extended for 2 years, and we await that white paper to really understand what the next steps are.
Okay, so it was only picked up in the national media, it was in the Daily Mail, that obviously all statutory overrides would be ending obviously next March, so it's great to actually hear that that's being carried over for 2 years.
That's been announced and confirmed.
Is actually wrong. Okay, thank you.
Okay, does anyone have any further questions or comments? Thank you very much, Caroline. The recommendation is that we note the report, we note the draft unaudited statement of accounts for 24 to 25, which were published by the date that they needed to be, 30th of June, in accordance with the requirements of the accounts and audit regulations, and that 3, we note that they will be subject to external audit and presented to committee for approval at the meeting planned for 20th of January 2026. This will be ahead of the backstop date of 27th of February 2026. Everyone clear and happy to accept those recommendations? Excellent, thank you. Item 10, this is about the SIPFA assurance review. Ian, I think you're giving a verbal update on this.
I'm doing a verbal update because given you had enough papers in your pack, you'll note Part C of the annual governance statement addresses the SIPFA review and the 8 recommendations and where we are in terms of closing those down. So I wanted to just have the opportunity just to reiterate what that annual governance statement details, and that the different areas required to be addressed, covering the various governance issues around the MTF, the medium-term financial plan, how we address that through our reporting, through to how the family of companies is managed, and some of the narrative around ensuring there's a proper link between the cost of borrowing and the reporting internally at the council. So we've addressed each of those 8 points that were flagged, and have explained how we have closed those down, as I say, and we have formally put that into the annual governance statement, given the importance of that review as a matter of governance, and therefore to conclude. So I just wanted to verbalise that, but obviously we can either leave questions till we talk about the annual governance review, which I think is next, annual governance statement, sorry, next, or happy to take questions now.
So is everyone happy to ask questions on this with the next agenda item, which is the annual governance statement as suggested? Okay, so Ian, the annual governance statement is also over to you and to Liz as well.
Thank you, Chair. The annual governance statement is to be issued, it's always required to be issued in terms of best practice alongside the statement of accounts that Caroline has just introduced. It follows the best practice guidelines set out by SIPFA and Solace in terms of covering an adopted approach, that the framework that's remained in place for the local authority that continue in continuation since prior year, that sets out to explain clearly to the committee and to the reader of that document the various areas of governance that have been addressed during the year. We've approached this to clarify both, we talked earlier about the external audit findings, and we've touched upon where we are in that journey in terms of the findings that were set out for 2020, 2021. And we have one remaining outstanding external audit point. And then the 2023-24, there were 15 findings, of which I think we've closed 8, if I've got that correct. We then touched upon some other key matters that have been arisen as a result of that process, moving into the internal audit report, which you've heard from colleague Louise earlier, talking about the overall assessment of a reasonable assurance in terms of the internal control framework from their work that they've undertaken in the year. We have highlighted in that report, which I think, given some of the conversation we had earlier around some of those limited assurance reviews, just to ensure that the committee, and again, the reader of this document, is clear on the status of actions that have been taken in respect of closing down some of those key actions in respect of those audits. And then we have also, as I just mentioned, put out in full details around that SIPFA review that was launched, that was released by the government as a result of that, undertaking that review back in March, just at the end of the financial year. And finally, although the Amada Way Independent Learning Review and the action plan that arose as a result of that were released after the year end, we thought, given it was the importance, given to the time period to which it related, the importance of that as a governance matter, that the elements of that review that were related to governance we've put into this report as well, and it will be obviously a key focus when we roll forward 12 months, and it is a real key driver for some of the actions that we're undertaking this year. The front section of the report sets out the framework, as I've mentioned, the different ways in which we address the different wheels of the spoke, which is the best practice guidelines. And as an appendix to the report, we've set out both some of the an output of some senior leadership engagement on their assessment, internal assessment of that framework, and also the overall framework in terms of how it's deployed at the authority. I will just close by setting out some of the priority actions that we're flagging looking forwards, although predominantly this is about looking backwards. Again, looking into next year, this year now, 25-26, the covering sheet just addresses those 4 key bullets that we flagged, which are, again, continuing to address and closing down those open action points of those limited assurance and new limited assurance reviews that may come up. Hopefully we won't bring many of those, but when they do, we just must take those actions seriously. Again, closing down those last external audit points and also the value for money assessment points, which are also, I didn't reference, apologies, but are key, and actually those predominantly relate to us addressing medium-term financial plan, which is a piece of work we're just starting off and doing over the summer, so we will bring that back to the committee. Deliver the detailed actions I've just mentioned, the MARDA way, independent learning review, and sort of continue to develop our operational effectiveness programme and deliver that ongoing review and assurance in terms of ensuring that governance is maintained and in line with the framework. I don't know if colleagues have anything else they wanted to add, otherwise back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Stevens.
Thanks. I've got 3 separate points, so I'll ask the first and then leave you to work out how you want to take it. If there are a multitude of other people wanting to ask, I'm happy to wait my turn. Pages 5 and 6 at the top, although that phrase is radically coming out of use, seeing as the pages 5 and 6 appear on the right when you look at it landscape. It's the issue regarding the limited assurance in adult social care. I note it's one of the priority actions. I think, can I ask, do these issues go before the relevant scrutiny panel? Because in terms of member oversight, we've worked out that a priority action has been identified. I don't think it's for us, for this panel, to speak to the directors and the service and the heads of service in that area to look in that granularly detail, but I do think it is the role of the relevant scrutiny panel. So I would, given the nature of adult social care and the risks that come with that particular service, would it be appropriate, Chair, to refer that to our colleagues? Hannah will let us know which scrutiny panel that will be, because I think they are the ones to get the director, the service directors in, the staff on the ground, and look into, do that drilling down. That's not our job here. The fact that an issue has been identified shows that this part of the council is working well. What we need to know is adult social care work going to work as effectively as that in terms of solving the problem?
Through you, Chair, I think that's absolutely take that recommendation, Councillor Stevens, and liaise with democratic support and make sure that works its way through and make that recommendation and for the chair of that committee.
It might be that they don't want to touch it, but that's their choice.
We will flag your point to them and leave them to determine in terms of their workload.
Did you want to ask your other questions next?
Yeah, I'll butt it in front of the millions of other people wanting to ask. It's to do with, it's page 39, again at the top or side, depending on which way you're looking at the review of the Constitution. We used to have a body to do, I think there should be at least member participation in this, if not member led. We used to have a body that had a multitude of names. You remember that the late Eddie Rennie and I used to serve on this quite regularly. We haven't met for an awful long time, and I just wonder if the review of the Constitution would be a good moment to reinvigorate, relaunch, whatever phrase you want to put on it, because I'm not sure that having officers on their own review our Constitution, and that, it is our document. It's going back to where we started right at the beginning of the meeting, it's a political document, not a party political document, but one that we should we should govern. And I think the fact that body hasn't met for some time, if it does still exist, is something that is raising my eyebrows at the very least.
Through you, Chair. I mean, this is arising from the Armada Way Learning Review. So, firstly, your Audit and Governance Committee, we have a report coming to you to how that's going to be managed. I think what will happen is there'll be the Constitution is being reviewed in the context of the Armada Way review at the moment, and then we will bring any recommendations to the committee thereafter. But we can consider setting up a further subcommittee if that would prove helpful. That's something perhaps we can discuss once we've decided how we're going to monitor the actions from the Armada Way report.
Well, one either does or did exist for an awful, and if it did, if it's in the past tense, it did for an awful long time. And I just think that with that, when there's, again, word of the day, when there's politically sensitive issues to discuss, I think that should be a councillor, obviously on a cross-party to whatever degree we can deem necessary. It should be a councillor-led process. So I know we're coming on to look at the Armada Way issue in detail in a short while, but I just think relaunching that would send a positive message. If I can put it in those terms?
Yeah, we're happy to take that recommendation forward.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to bring in Mrs Benny now. She's also indicated. Then I'll come back to you, Councillor Stevens, providing there's no other hand.
Thank you. I was going to say I was happy to wait, but thank you very much. It's just a quick question, and this is where I was declaring my potential conflict. So page 36, when you look at the little boxes at the very top, so page 34 down the side, and I was just interested because it talks about the built-in growth for adults and children's social care is insufficient to cover the increasing pressures, and the recommendation is regular monitoring and forecasting. And when I read that, I sort of thought, okay, so what does regular mean? And then what is the so what? Because if that's the prediction, how regular, and then what happens?
Through you, Chair. So, as you can imagine, an important role of my team, and I have a team that are focused very much on adult as a directorate, will be working with the strategic and service directors and heads of service, well, actually the team, depending on what the relevant piece of work, to be business partners and to understand, and throughout the year be understanding what is happening in terms of the trend analysis, etc. We will then we report from month to May onwards through the year. We will do a formal report. We engage the corporate management team. We also report throughout the year to Cabinet, and we will also report to Scrutiny Management Committee. So not every month, but the relevant report that falls within the relevant cycle. So we are looking monthly. We are looking all the time, and that is highlighted and escalated as needs to. So there's visibility of that to the appropriate committees through the authority.
Supplementary, or are you happy with?
So I suppose that's helpful in terms of process. The bit for me is, given the environment we're in, then what happens is that growth is insufficient as it's described in the governance issue in the statement. I suppose therefore, what's the so what in terms of then what happens?
Sorry, Ms. Benny, I may have misunderstood the question. So, I mean, this is all part of the role that the team, my team will play working with the directorate in terms of what other opportunities, savings initiatives, etc. they may be having to, savings plans or delivery plans that they'll be working on through the year. So it's not in isolation. It's about having early oversight and be able to react and ensure that we work with partners and ensure that we do the work we do need to do internally to, as we did last year and we need to, which is achieve a balanced budget. So it's a whole stream of different activities that we will do both within directorate and actually across the organisation, as well as we understand where those pressures lie. So it's about keeping people updated, informed and reacting appropriately as we go through the year.
Councillor Stevens, I'll come back to you now.
Don't say it so reluctantly like that, Chair, please, please. Page 46, Appendix 1, the senior, it's a similar point to previously. Senior Leadership Team Survey looks really interesting. When are we going to have something for the political arm of the council? We know what 27 senior officers view, and that's and I'm not downplaying that, that's absolutely fine. But the first one is member officer relations. You've only asked one side of that relationship, according to this. And I've got absolutely nothing personally to suggest the findings are incorrect or would, but it's nice to be asked. You know, you ask how are Bill and Kevin getting on these days? Well, if you only ask one of us, I say, oh, Kevin's great, really like Kevin. You ask him, oh, I can't stand Bill. No. It's a bit lopsided. And clearly some of the questions wouldn't be appropriate and would need to be changed. But I think in principle, having a survey to balance the political versus the professional arm of the organisation, I think would be a really good idea. But I would say that because it's my idea.
I think that's a good suggestion and we're happy to take that as a recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any further questions or comments on the annual governance statement? No? Excellent. So the recommendation is to approve this alongside the statement of accounts prior to signature by the leader, the chief executive and Ian, the service director for finance. Everyone happy with that recommendation? You're against. Okay, we'll note that Councillor Finn is against that recommendation. We'll move on to agenda item 12. This is the Armada Way Action Plan Subcommittee report. And Liz, I believe this is your item.
Thank you, Chair. So, as already mentioned, this report is to ask the committee to set up a subgroup of Audit and Governance Committee to oversee the implementation of the Armada Way Independent Learning Review Action Plan. As mentioned in the report, a resolution was made at full council on the 2nd of June, as set out in the report. The Audit and Governance Committee established a cross-party subcommittee to oversee the implementation of the action plan. The cross-party element was arose as a result of an amendment made by the Green Party, which was agreed by full council that the subcommittee should be cross-party. The report presents to you some suggested recommendations, some suggested terms of reference, and a suggested timetable for when you when the subcommittee meets to consider the progress against the action plan. So the matters for committee to consider today is how the subcommittee will be constituted, whether that be as a formal committee, which is open to the which will be publicly streamed. That would give the greatest transparency to the process. Whether cross-party, whether you're content for a cross-party to be truly cross-party, including all members, all parties of the council, or whether it's going to be proportionate, politically proportionate, as is the committee constituted at the moment. And as I say, the frequency of when the subcommittee will meet, and then happy to take any suggestions around the terms of reference or whether that the committee considers that fit for purpose. So I think that's enough to give a background of what we're asking you to consider and discuss today, and happy for you to put forward any alternative recommendations to those contained within the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Liz. Any questions or comments? Councillor Finn.
There's only one thing, one point I'd like to raise with regard to the content of the report. There's no mentions of ethics and an ethical stance with regard to the decision making.
The action plan is based on the content of the independent learning review report. So the actions directly relate to what's in the report from the independent learning review panel, and there was nothing that didn't feature within the report. So we're reflecting the actions that we've been asked to consider within the independent learning review.
So what you're saying is that we couldn't add an ethical perspective to that report in any context, whatever that previous report says, we've got to stand by that, or is there any room for
Your purpose is to review the delivery of the action plan as reported to full council to ensure that it's on time, on target, and being delivered by officers.
Okay, so a tick box, I get it.
Councillor Stevens, did I see you indicate?
Yeah. I mean, we did have a chance, I think, to raise these points at the full council meeting, if memory serves, and my memory, as age gets the better of me, isn't as good as it once was. But I think those points were teased out there. So it's not a tick box exercise, as in we're being boxed into a corner, but nor do we have the right to go anywhere we like. These parameters are set by a group of independent experts that the council commissioned. I don't think there was any, if there was any complaint about their independence or whatever, I've certainly never heard that, and I trust our officers that if there were, we wouldn't have got this far in the process. I'm just looking at the recommendations, and number 2, and it just came out in the monitoring officer's introduction. We seem to be being, I'm not sure that all represents what was agreed at the full council. I don't know if colleagues feel the same way. We're hearing comments like truly cross-party, which is very, very subjective. I mean, this committee isn't truly cross-party, but it doesn't stop it functioning within our constitution. So I'm not sure that pointing us, in one direction is good. And I think what I would take from Lee's comments is that we do need to get this absolutely right. I would certainly go that far. I would certainly go that far. So I just wonder, Chair, do we need perhaps to take a little bit more time with this and perhaps look at the recommendations a bit more? I don't know. I'm happy to listen to other colleagues' views on that.
I've seen Councillor Rainsford indicating quite strongly as well, so I'll bring her in now.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Stevens, for raising the issue in the first place. Just looking at what the Audit and Governance Committee were requested to do, it was to establish a cross-party subcommittee. It wasn't specific about exactly who should be on that at the time. But we've got a whole series of votes, actually, Chair, on this, potentially. Disapplying political balance requirements. Do we want to do that? That's in the cover sheet, amongst other things, as well as the items set out in the suggestions that have come from officers. Given we had 500 pages to look at this week, I think I would personally like to take that away and give it a little bit more thought. It's a big issue. We really want to get the overseeing of the implementation of the scheme right. So I would personally feel happier if I had a bit more time to actually consider, almost vote by vote, what we're going to be asked to look at. It's important we get it right, but it's very important it's transparent too.
Am I hearing of potential request for a deferral of this agenda item? Yeah.
Totally agree.
Okay, I'll put that to committee. I'm not hearing any dissent on that. Mrs. Ben?
So I wonder whether there's 2 parts to this, and whether actually there's something around it feels absolutely appropriate to be confirming that we would uphold the decision taken at full council around establishing a cross-party subcommittee, but maybe then the terms of reference are the piece that are the subject of discussion. So actually, in principle, the establishment of a subcommittee is not in, I don't get a sense there's any doubt around that. So I feel able to support that. Given what you're saying about the need to discuss the terms of reference, I think maybe that's the bit that then needs further discussion, but reflecting also what the expectation of, what the original expectation is and what gets added or not, given there was an original brief to this, isn't there? So we need to uphold that.
Councillor Stevens.
Yeah, I don't want to put you and Lee in an awkward position, but I'm also conscious of time, and time that's part of the ethical nature as well. It's local government does run slow at the best of times. So as part of the given that there are points of agreement and then points where people differ, and in the spirit of cross-party working, one suggestion in my mind is that in terms of the detail, how it looks, what the terms of references are, does it meet in secret or in open web stream, whatever, I would be happy to trust you and Lee as a cross-party team to actually go through that and try and find some agreement if you can. If you can't, and I don't say that with any humour or anything like that, then you can't. But rather than waiting another few months to get a similar report back with some important detail changed, I would be very happy to delegate the two of you to, if you can find agreement, to come up with a set of terms of reference, membership, etc., in order that we can actually get going and the actual work that's recommended can start, rather than come back in 3 months' time and, oh yeah, we've changed 2C, so it's when you could perhaps, there's potential that you could do that in a week 2's time.
So just to be absolutely clear.
No, let's not. Let's not be shrouded in doubt.
To be absolutely clear, we're happy to agree with all the recommendations apart from the terms of reference, which you'd like myself and Councillor Finn to go away and work on. Rainsford?
I need clarity, I'm afraid, Chair. Sorry. We were talking about agreeing that we go ahead and establish the cross-party group.
Yeah.
Over and above that line of agreement, everything else falls in within the terms of reference. So I am assuming that that's actually the case, that we are actually only agreeing in the first instance the establishment of this cross-party subcommittee, as per full council asked us to do.
Yes.
Good.
Given the political nature, Chair, if you and again, I'm saying this, we all have a laugh, but this is said in all seriousness. If you and Lee don't feel comfortable going away with that delegated authority, then I'm happy not to move it. I'm just thinking as a time we seem that close, and all that remains is detail.
Yeah.
And you are the chair and vice chair. Yeah, no one else is the chair or vice chair, so I think it comes within your remit, if you like, to go away and have a proper cross-party chat on the membership. Do we meet does the group meet in public? Does it not meet in public? That type, and I offer no view on that, but those are the sort of conversations that we need to have, and I'm not sure thrashing it out now is the best way to do that. I think it's that sort of private conversation with all things considered.
Councillor Finn?
Yeah, just say I totally agree, Bill. At the end of the day, it's all about accountability and transparency. And I think it would do the committee good to be in that position as well. And sometimes not having officers there is a good thing, that we can talk outside the box as well. So, and thrash things out ourselves and then consult with the officers thereafter with regard to the conclusions of or thereof. So
I think that would be a decision for you two. I'm not suggesting you do it in the
absolutely.
absence of officers. I'm not saying officers have to be there.
No,
But that's for you two to work out when you go away.
Yeah, that we
So,
sit
yeah.
down, look at it objectively, and then come back and thrash it out and come back to you with a positive answer. Yeah, and it reduces that timescale as well. And it's a proactive approach.
Mrs. Benny.
Sorry, just, and as you've been talking, I wonder whether there may be a real benefit to having an officer present, in the sense that Liz has the detail. The risk is, so I believe we have a culture where you can say it as it is, and also Liz could help you frame it appropriately, so that what you want to be built in there is built in the right way. Does that make sense?
That makes sense
Yeah.
to me, yeah.
Because the risk is you do lots of work and spend time trying to create something, and then actually the corporate approach, there's well, you can't do it that way, you've got to tweak it this way, and actually do that together just once, maybe, because support of somebody like Liz, who could just refine it once and do the job once and get it done. Yeah.
Through you, Chair, I think that's a sensible suggestion. I think I ought to meet with you and leave in Councillor Finn. Thank you.
Excellent. So I think if there's no further suggestions, comments, questions on that, the recommendation is that myself, Councillor Finn, Liz as monitoring officer will work on that constitution. And then do we agree that by email and correspondence rather than defer that to the next Audit and Governance Committee? Because we do want to get started with this piece of work. It is so important.
Yeah, I think next meeting we've got the report on the relief of mafficking to go through first. So I think just to get some speed into the process would be a good idea.
Okay. So is committee happy to agree those recommendations? Wonderful, thank you. Now move on to item 13. We've been joined by Kirsty Spencer, Head of Health, Safety and Wellbeing, who's going to introduce the annual report for 2024-25.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. So this is the Health, Safety and Wellbeing report for the period 1st of April 2024 to the 31st of March 2025. And it is a statement of where we are in terms of performance against our health and safety management system, which, as you know, is clearly detailed in the Health, Safety and Wellbeing policy, which you've all seen. Just a couple of highlights from the report, one of which is around the lone working device programme, which is a programme which I know has been greatly needed across the council services. That's now being rolled out. You'll see from the statistics within the report that stress and incidents involving violence and aggression have continued to rise, and I think this is a piece of work that is really vital in maintaining the safety and security and actual psychological safety of the staff across all of our services. We are going to start with a trial in the Independence at Home team very soon. We've also got a stress survey which is went live yesterday, and that was alluded to in the report, but that is actually live. In terms of highlight for training, we've undertaken quite a detailed training programme with the corporate management team, training around accountabilities and responsibilities, but also a activity in response to the accountabilities and responsibilities detailed within the health, safety and wellbeing policy. So all of the executive officers have worked through their accountabilities in the policy and have assured themselves that they have processes in place for seeking assurance from their directorates and their services. In terms of areas for improvement, you'll note that on page 8, incidents closed on time. we are still below where we need to be in terms of closing our incidents on time. So this is in relation to investigating our incidents and making sure that those incidents that have been reported are closed within the required timescale. So you'll see actually that insignificant incidents, as we term them, so the lower level incidents, tend to be closed much quicker, obviously, because the incident investigation timescale is much less. But we do need to continue working towards making sure that we're meeting that key performance indicator. I'm more than happy to take any questions that anybody has, but that's all I wanted to draw your attention to.
Thank you, Kirsty. I'd also like to welcome Chris Squire, Head of HR, who's joining us today. So does anyone have any questions for either Chris or Kirsty?
Can I ask about near misses? How
Yeah.
confident are you that the training you've been giving people is starting to work, and that we're seeing an uptick in the reporting of near misses, and that people understand why it's important that near misses are reported and not just sort of shrugged off?
Yeah, so thank you, good question. And I think you'll see from the incident reporting data within the report that the number of reported incidents, and that includes near misses and other more significant incidents, that number's gone up. And the riddle reporting, so the number of incidents that are really significant, has gone down. So just that indicator in itself is a really good piece of intelligence, and it tells us that many more incidents are being reported, but of a much lower level. We know that near misses, we are getting more near misses, but actually, interestingly, this last year we've had our first flurry of hazard reporting. We've never had that to date. So that is those hazard spotting situations that don't even really make it to an incident. So people are feeling much happier and much more supported to be able to report hazard situations. And there is the facility on the Assure system for those really low level situations to be reported. So, you know, the data in itself is an indication that the culture is improving with regards to reporting incidents.
Councillor Finn and then Mrs. Ben.
Yeah, just a quick one. As a result of the incident reporting, are the risk assessments being updated as a result, and what percentage sort of risk assessments have been updated as a result?
Yeah, that's interesting. So as you'll know, because I think I reported this last time, we are currently working towards making sure all of our risk assessments are centrally recorded on the Assure Evotics Assure system. So currently risk assessments are held locally, and the data for those are held within management toolkits. So it is difficult from a central point of view to give you an absolute assurance that that's happening. So all I can tell you is that my health and safety team work with their respective directorates to make sure that as those incidents are reported, that the risk assessments are updated. But that kind of data is held locally rather than centrally at the moment. But you'll know from the Assure action that's in the action plan that we are transferring all of those risk assessments centrally. So I hope going forward in the future to be able to start reporting a bit wider in terms of risk assessments. So where we've got actions that are outstanding, where we've got reviews that are outstanding, that kind of data. So yes, it's a good question, and we're sort of along that journey, I'd say, in terms of being able to tie those two things up.
Yeah, just say thank you. At least we're moving in the right direction. That's the most important part here.
Yeah.
Mrs. Benny?
Yes, thank you. I've got two bits, if I may. So the first one is around We've been doing some work in Livewell around looking at the high frequent but low incident stuff, you know, and one of my colleagues calls it the microaggressions, and we're starting to look at microaggression and the impact of long-term microaggressions. So we might have a high number of them, but people write them off quickly because you think, oh, that's just something small. But actually for individuals, potentially, it chips away over a long period of time and actually does damage. And so I'm interested to understand whether you're exploring that at all, because it's something that we've become more and more interested in. And if not, is it something you could maybe start to explore? So that was the first one, and I've just got another question after that.
Okay, yeah, really valid point. So through the steering group, and I know Chris is in the room and can talk about the work that we're doing at the steering group. So violence and aggression is a project topic of the steering group, and this is where the lone working device project has come from. But you're absolutely right in terms of violence and aggression. We have got a culture. We've got different cultures actually across the organisation. So you've got some services that have a much higher tolerance level to microaggression, and you know that we are finding that we get lots of reports from teams that perhaps aren't exposed to this daily, but we get less reports from those teams that are exposed to it on a frequent basis. So yes, we are working through this at the steering group, but you know, actually it might be worth touching base with Livewell just to see if there's any lessons that you know we can learn from them and perhaps share some best practice. So yeah, I don't know whether Chris, you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Kirsty. Thank you for that. It's something we're really aware of, and we know we've got, you know, obviously we have a significant number of staff who are in those front-facing roles and in the public eye as well, and in the high-profile public eye comes to that. And I think there'll be perhaps a number of elected members around this table who'll be thinking they experience similar things when in the course of their duties as well. So we are really cognizant of that. It comes, for us, a lot of it comes back to what Kirsty was saying about the cultural side of it with staff. And this is something we're working on through, we're just putting the finishing touches for new people strategy for the organisation. It comes into that, and also the elected member piece comes into that as well in terms of support for elected members. So obviously we have access to kind of third-party support through the Employee Assistance Programme, occupational health and such like. But really, the concern for me, I think, is as you described it, that kind of chipping away at people and what happens to them on a daily basis, and they shrug their shoulders and give up, almost become numb to it. And that's what we've got to lift the lid on, I think. Sorry, not lift the lid on, we know that lid has been lifted. It's what we need strategies, coping mechanisms and ways of rebutting these things formulated as well. So that is work in progress. But yeah, really, really interested in exchanging ideas on that. Thank you.
No, that'd be helpful. I'll put you in contact. That's great. No, that's really helpful. Thank you. And then the other bit was around the survey you were talking about. So is that a sort of a set time, and or is it going to be live for a long time, and do you gather ongoing data? How will it work, and what are you going to do with the information?
Yeah, it went live yesterday, and it's live until, I'm just checking on staff room, I think it's live until middle to end of August, 22nd of August. So it's live for a month. We have had 200 responses already in a day, so that's quite encouraging. It is anonymous, although you know, there's obviously some information in terms of areas of the organisation. We're not going to report individually. We're not going to report where there can be identifiable information. So what we're hoping to gather from this is themes across the organisation. This survey has been created with the HSE's stress management standards in mind. So you may or may not be aware that the way that you assess stress according to the HSE is within 6 different themes. So change, workload, as you mentioned, actually, relationships, which includes, you know, bullying, violence and aggression, those kind of things. So it looks at across at all of those themes. So we have structured this survey so that what we hope to get from this is some information across the organisation that acts sort of like an organisational stress survey, a stress assessment, so that we can take some of the pain out of individual directorate and service assessments sort of across the organisation. That's what we're hoping, and then we can target our interventions of those areas that we really feel are requiring the interventions. And then we can also drill down with more focused stress risk assessments in those areas that we can identify from this. But this is the first time that we've structured this any kind of sort of well-being survey, I suppose. It's the first time we've structured it in this way. So, you know, yes, we will be maximising the data that we get in to try and support our managers and our directors across, so that some of this assessment requirement and burden we can support with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Finn.
Yeah, I just think there's a couple of areas we just need to be aware of. So obviously, as Plymouth's changing culturally, there are cultural difficulties with regard to expectations. And I think we must induce a thing called common sense here. What is microaggression and what is just pure frustration with an individual? Make sure the two don't get classed as one. So there has to be a bit of leeway, excuse the pun, with regard to that point.
Yes, I suppose the individual, the reaction of the individual and what the individual perceives is probably the most important thing. So I would always, you know, if an individual perceives that they are being subject to any level of aggression, then I would absolutely support them to be logging an incident. And in order for us to have some consistency about that, really each team and service needs to have a violence and aggression risk assessment that looks at the kind of aggression or microaggression or violence, physical violence, psychological violence, whatever it might be. Each service needs to have a risk assessment that clearly identifies, you know, the tolerance, I suppose, the benchmarking. But you know, it is an individual's response to that is determines whether it's an incident or not an incident. It's quite difficult to talk about in the general term. Each incident requires its own assessment, I think. So I kind of get what you're saying, but actually I don't want to discourage people from reporting. Yeah, I suppose that's all I've got to say.
Thank you. Chris, you also indicated.
Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you, Councillor Finn. I think health, safety and wellbeing is and has to be rooted in common sense, which kind of goes both ways as well. And again, if we talk with some of our front-facing teams, let's perhaps focus on the housing options team, where they are dealing face-to-face with individuals who've had hugely frustrating and who might have had hugely frustrating times dealing with authority. It could be the council, could be central government, could be the police, and they're absolutely trained in how to recognise what is going on, what de-escalation techniques might be needed, and also to understand things from what they might call a trauma-informed approach as well. So staff are trained to work their way through this, but we'd rather they over-reported, I think, than under-reported, and then we can kind of do the filtering from there as well. Thank you.
You know, I totally agree, Chris. It's like we've all had the dustman outside the house. It's left the rubbish on the floor, and you say, for goodness sake, just pick it up and put it in the back of the bin. Now, is that a right to be offended or not? So this is where I was saying with regard to common sense. We all get frustrated with the council. I deal with constituents every day that are frustrated with this council. but I don't take offence to some of the emails that have come in. But I do appreciate, on the other hand, that they are frustrated, as we get frustrated with systems and bureaucracy. So it's just trying to find that fine line, rather than the right to be offended, that there is a common sense set of guidelines there that, you know, if we're going to say, apply a bit of common sense here, you know.
It's good citizenship. So yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything else on this? I've got a question. This is about the occupational health contract. I see that the Medigold contract is currently under review, but the report does mention that the structure's outdated on the Medigold system, which can impact the accuracy of the reporting. And this continues to pose challenges which might improve with iTrent. How is that expected to improve? Maybe would it not be better to look for another OH provider?
I'll certainly start answering. I know Chris might have something to say about iTrent, but in terms of the occupational health provision, you are right. We are renegotiating both the occupational health and the EAP contracts in time for next year, not this year. The occupational health provision itself continues to be of a good standard. And the reporting issues, we are working with Medigold to make improvements there. The information from the iTrent system will be easier transferred to and from the occupational health system. So core HR wasn't user friendly in that way, but iTrent is definitely a much better system. And having used iTrent in a previous organisation, I know what the system can do, and I know how so I've used iTrent with Medigold actually, and the two together are a very useful and supportive system. Chris, I don't know whether you want to say more about iTrent.
Not a huge amount, thanks, Kirsty. That's pretty spot on. I think if colleagues aren't aware, we've been implementing a new payroll HR management recruitment system called iTrent. The work done on that means that it's a lot easier than our previous system to maintain organisational structures which flow across the different systems that we use, including the occupational health system. So now we've done the payroll part of that. That's business as usual. We went live in April. Last month there were no payroll errors in this council. Please, nobody put their hand up and say I have one. So that's the information that came back from Delt. And the emphasis now is on what's called the benefits realisation phase of it, which is making sure that we have all the kind of non-payroll, all the things that connect to payroll, all those elements working absolutely fantastically well. And that includes the interface of our occupational health and employee assistance programmes as well.
That's reassuring. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything else on this item? Brilliant. Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
We'll now move on to item 14, the Treasury Management Outturn Report. Wendy, this is over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The report is set out on pages 283 to 298 in your agenda pack, and it sets out the Treasury Management activities for the financial year 2024-25 and is required to comply with the SIPFA Code of Practice on Treasury Management. The report covers, confirms capital financing, borrowing, debt rescheduling, investment transactions for the year, including the outturn position on Treasury Management and the final position on prudential indicators. I'll start in section A. The Treasury Management position sets out the balance sheet summary in table 1, with key points to note that the council's capital financing requirement has increased. This is in line with its spending on its capital programme, and on the 2nd of June, a provisional outturn position was reported to City Council with 109.309 million spent on the capital programme, of which 31% of that was financed through borrowing, together with other adjustments to the capital financing requirement is the adjustments for the treatment of capital grants used to finance the capital programme where conditions have been met under the terms of the grant funding. The capital financing requirement at the end of 31st March 2025 was just under 870 million, with net borrowing increasing by 47 million from 656 million to 703. Also, just to note, there was a 11 million downward adjustment for the PFI liability due to the implementation of the new accounting standard, IFRS 16, from the 1st of April 2024, which my colleague Karen has referred to in the statement of accounts. Section B outlines as outlined in the Treasury Management Strategy approved in March 2024, the authority's chief objective when borrowing is striking a balance between securing lower interest rates, or the lowest interest rates we can secure, the cost and cost certainty, with the flexibility to renegotiate loans. Table 2 sets out the detail with our borrowing activity, which is reflecting our cash flow requirements being in the final quarter of the year being secured through PWLB and we secured those between rates of 4.84% and 5.09% as more affordable than the short-term rates being offered through other local authorities. Also in 2024-25 was the first year where we've had 2 LOBO arrangements called in, and in accordance with our Treasury Management Strategy, these were repaid. There's detail in the report on the rate, the call-in rate, which was significantly higher than the rate we were paying and higher than the PWLB rate that we could secure. Table also shows the average interest rate for borrowing at 3.27, which is lower than the average interest investment return rate. Investment activity is set out on table 3. This does reflect a shift with additional cash invested within the money market funds. The additional cash would have been through additional income being received through payments of accounts and receipts of grant monies. The Council have maintained pooled investments with Schroeder, Fidelity and CCLA, with other investment held with Altana Social Investment Fund, which has generated nearly 3 million from the original 50 million investment and is generating the highest yield of our investments. It is important to note that the capital value of pooled investment funds stood at 48.464 million as at 31st March, and below the original investment value. Currently, the unrealised loss from the downward valuation does not have an impact in the revenue budgets or the general fund, but further in the report it does highlight there is a sort of a stop date in 2029 where we would have to consider this. So as part of our investment strategy going forward, we will need to have close consideration in the value of our pooled investment funds. Point 20 of the report includes details of the return in holding against the Property Regeneration Fund, and this is categorised as a non-treasury investment holding. This has generated a positive return of 1.4% after taking account of direct costs, and these indirect costs include borrowing, which is interest and minimal revenue provision. The total borrowing held, the 703 million, will also include borrowing for the Property Regeneration Fund and other capital projects financed by service borrowing, where the service is funding that borrowing or through either efficiencies or income generation. Onto the 24-25 revenue outturn position set out in Table 4. This presents a favourable variation of 6 million. The original budget was set at 22 million and included 5 million increase to reflect the increased borrowing cost and minimum revenue provision expected in 24-25. The outturn variance fall into 3 main areas. There was a favourable 718,000 lower spend on borrowing cost. Interest received generated a higher return of 1.132, and an element of that would have been with our money market funds, where we are investing surplus cash where we can to generate additional income. And it's, as you can appreciate, it's very difficult when you're setting budgets to know when you're going to have surplus cash in the year ahead. So we had a benefit from that. But the largest variation was was held with the minimum revenue provision of 4.354 million, with 4 million, nearly 4 million held for the original Miel transaction, which is now subject to a separate capitalisation direction. So that was a benefit in 24-25. Section D sets out in the external context of Treasury management activities with commentary provided by Ireland Close on the economic background and credit risk. And then the final part of the report is looking at our prudential indicators. Liability benchmark sets out the council's external borrowing profile against its forecast capital financing requirement based on, or it will include the part of the 5-year capital programme. So that sort of really sets out when our exposure to borrowing and maintaining our borrowing below the benchmark. Then the next table sets out interest rate exposure, and this needs to be highlighted that where we did actually didn't comply with one of the targets that we'd set ourselves, with the anticipation that we'd be using greater short-term borrowing, and in the end we had to apply for PWLB borrowing, which is a minimum of 1 year, so falls into a fixed interest rate exposure category. So say we exceeded our limit with that, but going forward, it was done purely on the basis that it was the cheapest form of borrowing, so it was cheaper to borrow through PWLB than other local authorities. Then under point 41, it just sets out the new PWLB borrowing that we took out through the year. So we took out 140 million new PWLB loan arrangements, of which 72 million of that was used to repay maturing loans entered into in previous financial years. And then under point 42, it sets out our maturity structure of our loans, which has been complied with, and then the other areas such as principal sums invested, and more importantly, our operational boundary. Our actual debt was within both our operational boundary and authorised limits, so those were complied with. Section F, again, it was commentary provided by Ireland Close, and this just gives an outlook on the remainder of 25-26, again from an economic point of view. So, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Councillor Rainsford.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask for some clarification? In our opening note, recommendations and reasons, it asks us to note, as detailed in paragraph 42, section E of the attached report, and it talks about the threshold or level fixed rate exposure for borrowing being exceeded. I think that should read paragraph 41. Because 42
yes, you're right. Sorry, I think
if that correction could just
we merged. Yes, so
40. Could I also ask for a brief run through again, because I think I understood what you were saying when you were doing it. Okay. A brief run through of how borrowing was exceeded and how we managed that.
Right. Okay.
Please.
So,
thank you.
It's actually point 40, so I'll get that corrected. It's basically where we were when we were forecasting our treasury management strategy previous March. We were forecasting our borrow, which as outturn was 703 million. We were forecasting that 80% of that would be fixed rate borrowing that would be through PWLB or Lobos or other long-term debt. In practice, we exceeded that by 89%. As with the other side of it, was we were forecasting a higher percentage than we actually achieved with short-term borrowing. So the plans, or the expectation was we would do more short-term borrowing, and the reason for that was our close, our Treasury Management advisors were obviously indicating Bank of England rate reductions and all the other reductions. So it made sort of sense to do short-term borrowing and then refinance, hopefully at a lower rate. We're actually seeing that this year now, but and it was just when the reality of our cash flow requiring us to borrow money in the latter sort of 3-4 months of the year, when we went to the market to try and secure that funds, it was actually cheaper to borrow through PWLB than other local authorities. So it was really done. It was breached purely by basing on affordability, and we certainly need to reconsider that limit, because obviously it's slightly prudent, a bit like having a fixed rate mortgage. You know where you stand with it. For a number of years we have done a lot of short term 1-year PWLB, so while the rates have been relatively higher.
I appreciate that more detailed explanation. Thank you.
If I can, Councillor Rainsford, just come in as well, just to set the context of the purpose of that parameter is around interest rate risk. So predominantly you're weighted onto the fixed rates of interest, because obviously you are less exposed to negative or adverse interest rate exposure upwards. The reason there is a limit is that you can't take, as Wendy said, advantage of the decreasing rates as we happen to, hopefully be heading into as we go through the next few months. I think just the point that I think is important to flag is that shift between borrowing from other local authorities, which is under a year, to, as mentioned, the PWRB, borrowing is 1 year, but under the terminology that makes it it switches. It can't no longer be seen as variable rate. It has to be seen as fixed rate. Despite and the difference was only 1 day, and I think it's just being aware that it's a kind of. I think what we need to do is look at how we tier our fixed rate borrowing to those that are over 2 years, because obviously there's inflexibility with managing interest rate downwards, so to gain the benefit into those that are a year, into those that are seen as variable. So it'll be a development of those parameters to ensure that it's kind of given the better visibility, given the team did the right thing at that point in terms of affordability.
Councillor Finn and Mrs Bennett.
Yeah, so just to clarify that on the 31st of March 24, the actual borrowing came in at 655,532, PFI liability and finance leases 118,500. I also forgot earlier when I mentioned it, the IFRS 16 to allow operating leases to be brought onto the balance sheet from the 1st of April 24. Was that responsible for the increase this year from 118,500 PFI and finance leases to 219 for this financial year? That's as per the documents we've had. And because there was a forecast, the 31st of March 25, this was on a previous document we had earlier in the year. Yeah, with the projections that we had. Because we had the 3-year projections, it was the 24, 25, no, 4 year, 26 and 27. Yes, that was it, yeah. So are we on track to sort of keep in line with that? That's the basic question. Are we in track with the figures of the last 4 years that have been promoted to us?
Where we were with the mid-year report is we hadn't actually done the complete exercise to calculate the IFRS 16 impact. So it was quite we can't substantiate the numbers as strongly as we can now with the outturn.
Can we just ask one thing? Obviously, the PFI liabilities and finance leases have been encapsulated in one statement and given as one figure. In future, would you be able to break those two figures down so we know exactly what is PFI and what is finance leases to better understand the overall figure? Because when it goes from 118,500 to finance liabilities and debt at 219. That's that's 100 million quid. So it's just to break that down, so we've got a better understanding of where that money sits. All right, thanks.
Councillor Finn, I think if you're quoting the 219, actually in the report we're looking at, paragraph 47, the forward-looking are actually the boundaries, so the operational boundary, that's the 219 figure that you'll find in that table, compared to the actual figure, which is to the next column along, which is 99. So I think what's happened is I think you're mixing two different numbers. So the actual position at the year end was 99 million of other long-term liabilities versus a boundary, which is the prudent but best estimate of when the guys did the estimate back 12 months, and at that point there was uncertainty around the impact of IFRS 16. I can't talk of what got us to that 219, but the actual figure at year end was 99. It's in table 40, on the paragraph 47 in the report.
Yeah, well, this is why I said to avoid confusion.
Yeah.
Two are encapsulated in one. Would it not be better to have the two separate? So we know exactly what's being
We can. I was just making sure that it wasn't misunderstood that we'd gone from 118 to 219 because there were two different numbers.
That's just where the confusion rises.
Yep.
Encapsulated in one. So you can't say one's one.
Yep.
One's the other. So that's what I was trying to say.
Noted.
Mrs Benny.
Thank you. Just a quick question, but it's a bit of a lesson, please. Sorry. So it's the stuff on page 294. It starts paragraph 37, just above that, the liability benchmark. And I suppose the bit for me was, if I'm reading this correctly, and I might not be, which is why I want to test it. So that there's a liability benchmark there for 3 different years, and then there's existing borrowing. Is that saying at the moment we're above where we should be for March 25? However, the projection is we go below the benchmark. And I'm assuming because it's lower figures that's quite good. Yeah. But is that the right thing to be assuming?
So, yes, ultimately the dotted line, the net loan requirement, and is the shaded line is the crucial one. So we've got the dark shading and the lighter grey. That's currently what we're actually committed to with loans at this point in time. So the key thing is our loans don't go above the liability benchmark, and when they where they do in sort of 2051, it's flagging where we should be looking at where we'd have a lot of, and we have got a lot of loans fixed for 50 years, that we'd be looking to refinance those.
Chair, through you, Chair, if I can just come in and just give a bit of colour, because I think this is actually a really useful diagram and to understand, and I think it's just worth dwelling for a second. The turquoise line is the underlying, it's kind of the theoretical requirement to borrow, it's your CFR. The dotted line is the kind of calculated loan requirement based on a number of factors around available cash. For example, we talked earlier about the money that we're holding in money markets, etc. So the actual borrowing need is lower, and then you have, and we'll come on to this, but the critical line is the dark line, which is kind of deemed to be the requirement to borrow, i.e. you have to leave some liquidity. We need cash day to day to enable us to manage the ups and downs of grants and other things coming in. So we focus there. The liability benchmark is the dark line, is the dark red line, which we focus on. And then what we're looking at, it starts on the left at the 703 figure, which we talked about just now as a total borrowing. And what it does is it looks at the capital, makes some assumptions around our need into the future for borrowing. So it looks at a 5-year capital programme. You'll see that line increase because we will be borrowing. And then on the assumption that no other capital schemes would go ahead, because that's what we're looking at as a programme, so it declines itself down and the need to borrow declines down over time. So the space between the grey actual borrowing, the grey blocks, is what we've borrowed. So again, on the left side, you see the borrowing equals the borrowing need at 703, where we start the journey. It drops off very quickly because our borrowing is very short term. It's there's a lot of weighted towards 1 year. And then it goes on a flat line, which is our fixed rate long-term borrowing. Which Wendy rightly says there is a point where we have a lot of space that we have a requirement to borrow in the early years. If we did no other schemes over the 30 years, we would have too much borrowing in theory because we've got fixed rate borrowing. But we know that we are not going to not do anything for that time. So we monitor this to ensure that we are beneath our requirement to borrow, i.e. we haven't over borrowed, and we can see that you can start to layer in lengths of your loan types. If you wanted to extend out to longer term borrowing, you can see what headroom you had in 3 or 5 or 10 years as you want to layer, depending on interest rate movements, risk, etc. And that's where we use Arlene Close to advise what the best strategy is at the moment. But this is just demonstrating to the committee that there is space within our borrowing. We are well within, and we are on that kind of short term weighted borrowing at the moment.
Any further questions for Wendy on this report? No, thank you very much, Wendy. The recommendation is to approve this annual report and to note the threshold of fixed rate exposure for borrowing was exceeded, but it was done to mitigate against interest rate risk from temporary borrowing with other local authorities. But it did mean that we breached the rate limit set by the prudential indicator. But are we okay with this recommendation? Fabulous, thank you. Move on to item 15 now, the procurement strategy report. And I think Philip Simons is joining us.
He's here, he's confirmed, so just getting.
So just wait for him to arrive and then we'll recommence the meeting. Hello, Philip. Welcome to the Audit and Governance Committee. Are you all ready to go, or do you need a couple of minutes to set up? Okay, over to you.
So thank you for having me. The report outlines the Plymouth City Council's progress to delivering its procurement strategy, highlighting the achievements over the past year and setting out priorities for the year ahead. The strategy aligns with the Procurement Act 2023, which came into force in February 25, and reflects both national and local priorities, including social value, climate action, and economic inclusion. There is a number of key achievements that listed through it, and our action plan throughout the report from the past year, tracking progress across strategic themes and enablers with a strong focus on continuous improvement, partnership working, and readiness for the future statutory changes. We look today for a recommendation to mark the progress made to date and endorse the planned actions moving forward.
Thank you, Philip. Any comments or questions on the procurement strategy? Councillor Rainsford.
If I can just pass a comment, particularly pleased to see that whole life costing was now an explicit consideration. It's a sort of no-brainer, really. But I'd like to say the longer I'm in this role, the more I'm impressed by the range and knowledge of our officers, and a lot of that has come out in this paper and in the range of procurement we have to undertake. I mean, it's massive. So I just really wanted to say thank you, and I'm really pleased that we're upping considerably the number of PL postcode suppliers. I mean, that's a good move. Local businesses, thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo that. Thank you, Councillor Rainsford. Any further comments or questions for Philip on this? No? Wonderful. Thank you very much. The quickest report presentation ever. So yeah, the recommendation is to note this progress and endorse the actions, which I think we're all clearly agreeing to. Item 16 now, the risk management monitoring report. Ian, I think you're introducing this, but also Paul Stevens, maybe? He's not.
Sorry, Chair, no, I said I would cover this point for him today. He was caught up, so it's not a problem. I can cover.
Excellent. Over to you then, Ian.
So thank you. This is the risk monitoring report. Just to flag, this was at the position as at the end of March. It's done on a quarterly basis and is then taken to corporate management team to review. It presents the landscape, which is one of overall would be static in terms of where scoring is sitting within the strategic risks that are outlined. There was some work done as set out in the report to consolidate certain key risks. We have 3 consolidations, which is to bring better focus to where those key issues that are being managed lie around a broader social care sustainability piece. Unsurprisingly, as we will talk later, actually, we mentioned earlier around cybersecurity, and the third around the management of the financial position and resilience of the authority as it navigates through the challenges that it faces in terms of the medium-term financial plan. Those risks, those 3 I've outlined, are the 3 key risks. We also have 3 new introduced risks into this quarter. There is one, unsurprisingly, around the risk introduced around LGR and devolution. There is one around the scale of legislative change that is being undertaken in the landscape looking forwards. And the third one, which I might just dwell on slightly for a second, is around raising the risk around risk management in a risk management report. Now, that was as a result of some work that was undertaken and some reflections on where we were in terms of risk management. That was a report that was you may have seen in the internal audit report earlier, and that was just setting out some of the stepping back and looking at risk management in terms of the framework was in place and well embedded and well established at the authority. But what it flagged was a need to kind of bring to life risk management as a way of being engaged with by the authority and ensuring that we bring it into decision making, etc. So coming in, as you're aware, I think Ross Jager would have reported previously to this committee, who would have covered this area. I've stepped in to work with, I have an existing relationship with Louise through Devon Assurance Partnership. They have a risk management arm, so made introductions, and we're now starting to work with Devon Assurance Partnership more broadly around risk management, to do some work over the summer around strategic risks, and really starting to develop the strategic risks to then think more forward looking around doing some workshops, etc., with the authority and a directorate and into the kind of service level areas to ensure that we've really got those operational risks brought to life as well. So just to flag that although it's on there, there is a positive and proactive piece of work being undertaken in terms of risk management. That was only the things I wanted to flag at this point, and I wanted to hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Rainsford?
Yes, thank you for that report. Could you explain, because I may well have missed it, with 340 pages in here, but a number of in the directorate risk summaries, there are scores in brackets, 12, 6, 9, but I don't understand what those scores mean. Is 9 better than 12, or is it the other way around?
Oh, sorry, through you, Chair. So on page 348 of your pack, you'll see a grid, a 5x5 grid, which is looking at both impact and likelihood. So you will see 2 scores for any risk. There'll be a gross risk score, so this will be the immediacy of the likelihood and impact of that risk as it presents itself. So out of 25, so the maximum would be 25, 5 times 5 would be and I think our gross risk for our financial resilience is marked as a 25, to put it in context. The important point is where we then look at the mitigations that are within the authority and the steps we take, and at that net score thereafter. And it's that net score that I would draw attention to as where we should really be focusing and looking at ensuring that we are undertaking actions to progress bringing those scores down. We can't help, I suppose, where the gross risk is, but we should be looking at those net scores. The lower the better, I think, is the summary. In summary, the answer.
Mrs. Benny?
Yeah, thank you. It's just a quick question around you've just described, Ian, around the work that you're doing with the review with Louise. When are you expecting that to come to fruition? Because presumably that will influence what we're seeing today, won't it?
Exactly that. So we've got 2 workshops lined up, one in August, one in September, to manage with holidays with the CM, with corporate management team colleagues. And that's very important. We do it as a collective so that there's a shared ownership and understanding of what those strategic risks are. I'm not sure on timing. I think we have a meeting in September, so probably there may be an update, and certainly I can verbally update if we haven't completed that work, but certainly the next audit and governance thereafter, we will be able to bring that back, and that will probably be our Q2 half-year report will reflect that work. We will then be going straight into talking the language of risk with the wider authority and doing those workshops and bringing to life that framework that's well considered through a series of workshops, and then probably doing some assessment. And we will keep the report back to this committee. I think it's an important part. We're also in thinking around how do we bring that to life in terms of the authority and consideration of whether it needs to be a dedicated officer type committee around risk management as well, which we're just considering at this point as I work with the Devon Assurance Partnership team.
A supplementary question, if I may. Is there, so you're relatively new in, you've probably sort of, you scan and you look and you think, oh, this is interesting. You know, there's lots of things that pop up. Given what you see here, are there any other things that have popped up as a result of you just looking, which we may expect to see as a result of the process coming through?
I think I wouldn't say anything new, but I think we've got quite a comprehensive summary. I think what we'll see is, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way to anyone that's crafted for, a better quality to help engage in how we articulate those risks is I think one of the things we need to do just to help organisationally have that shared language. I think some of the way they present may not be as easy to interpret, particularly at that strategic level. So I think the coverage is there. I think that work, and I think what it is, particularly as we have quite a new corporate management team, as you say, myself, it's quite new actually, there's a number of members around that table. I think it's a really well-timed and important thing to come together on that and collectively own those. So no, I don't think, I've certainly not spotted anything yet that's missing, but I think we can help bring the language alive more. That's what we're working on.
Thank you. Councillor Sproston.
Yeah, it's very similar to the same point. I was wanted to ask with about devolution and Freeport are kind of generational kind of things happening to this city, and therefore when it comes to kind of mitigated risk, it's obviously a lot higher than it would be usually. So with that kind of in danger of repeating my kind of question as before, in regard to kind of seismic changes, how fast would they get kind of briefed, delivered, and would you go about kind of wanting to re-report it for any of those measures?
So these are the strategic risks that are faced by the authority. So we need to be mindful of not being a risk. I'm not saying that, I understand what you're saying, but not be a risk register for Plymouth. So some of those things where we see some of the more seismic changes, I imagine you're referring to, notwithstanding devolution, of course, that's very much being faced by the City Council. The work undertaken, and I mentioned about bringing potentially a committee, will certainly be a quarterly cycle where we should be reviewing, reflecting, formally reporting. If we bring the language alive and see better engagement, so for example, things through business cases when we're looking at different programmes of work, and also within sort of directorate management team conversations, we'd hope that there is a monthly or I can't mandate at this point because we haven't designed it, but what we are looking for, and actually really importantly, is that there is an application and a way of engaging with the risk register at the moment that is live, so you could go on and update. So it is meant to be an ongoing and live thing, but we will have the formally reporting that would be quarterly and through corporate management team, and then the appropriate report we brought to this committee. How we then intersperse that with how we manage as an officer group, we will work, and I'll update you as we go through.
Any further questions on this one? No? Excellent. So we'll move on to the whistleblowing policy at item 17, and Liz is going to introduce this one. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Chair. This is the annual review of the whistleblowing policy as set out in the policy, albeit we're bringing it back with some amendments based on the committee's concerns raised last year, and those are set out Appendix B. But just to briefly run through those, the committee wanted some greater clarity about who the policy applies to. Sections have been amended to address that, and I'll run through those in a minute. There was also concerns about people being able to raise concerns anonymously. So that issue has been tightened up a little bit, and also some a bit more clarity about what kind of behaviours the policy applies to. So I think the committee raised an issue around unacceptable behaviour, but there's some greater clarity based on the legislation about what the whistleblowing and policy includes, and just some other minor tidying up points that the committee raised last year, which have been addressed. So within the policy itself, you'll see the amended parts are in red. So the whistleblowing policy is in accordance with the Public Interest Disclosure Act, which amended the Employment Rights Act, requiring there to be a whistleblowing policy which protects workers. Workers are defined within the Public Interest Disclosure Act, so the policy has been amended to reflect, to give a greater understanding of what a worker is and who's protected under the policy. The Public Interest Disclosure Act also lists the points that the whistleblowing policy covers, the types of behaviour it covers and what can be reported under the policy. So that's been amended in red just to make that clearer. So for example, matters around inappropriate behaviour would not be covered under the whistleblowing policy. They would be for internal HR policies to manage. And I think those are the main changes within the policy. So I'm happy to take any questions or thank you.
So I think I saw Councillor Rainsford first and then Councillor Sproston.
Thank you. Thank you for doing the changes, and it's really helpful to have them all flagged in red, I have to say, for future reference. Paragraph 7.1, item G, it says they can go to any MP elected to represent Plymouth. I would say they can't. They will need to go to their individual MP because a lot of workers don't live in Plymouth.
Okay.
And MPs do tend to only deal with people who live in their own constituencies. They don't take cases from other places. Occasionally they will look at workplaces, but in that case, everybody would go to Luke Pollard because we're here. So I would amend that actually to their individual MP.
Thank you. I mean,
where they live.
I'll note that and make that amendment. I think the committee
Otherwise,
suggested
they'll all
MPs
be,
last time, but happy
poor
to.
old Rebecca Smith might get inundated with people who live in Tavistock, or you know, and that's not just not how it works.
Noted, and we'll amend accordingly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kevin?
Yeah, I wasn't here previously when these amendments were put in, but I think they're pretty on point and definitely beneficial. I just wanted to ask something roughly. I was looking at 3.4. And in regard to employees of contractors, how accessible is it for members of the council working for the council to understand who is actually contracted? Because I think best will in the world, I think there's so many contracts that go out there via the council. So how would someone actually know if they were or been in an incident and wanted to whistleblow? How accessible and how would they go about getting that information?
That's a good question. I mean, I would have thought contractors know that they're contracted by the council, but I mean, it's certainly a point we can give more consideration to and see if that can.
Yeah, sorry, I meant like as in potential council staff.
Yeah.
Or other contractors with other contractors, essentially. And, you know, there's, like I say, personally, I couldn't name every contractor in the council. And so it'd be nice to understand, especially, you know, so some of these contracts are within the general community. So, yeah, unless it was kind of advertised in some sort of manner, how would you find that information?
I think that's a good point that we can pick up and address as to how we make it known that there is this whistleblowing policy available. Thank you. We'll take that forward. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Stevens and Mrs.
Thanks, Chair. I only knew I was substituting very early on this morning, so I'm taking the risk of asking the stupid question, as in, which will generate the answer. It's there at the page you're looking for. So I don't know what's in here it may become obvious. In terms of 3.4, I know why you've underscored employees. Does that mean that councillors are not covered in terms of being a whistleblower, but also having the whistle blown against them? Is that what we're saying?
That is correct. The legislation is very clear about who it protects, which is a worker, as defined. So elected members aren't covered by that because it's designed to protect an employment where you can be removed from your employment because you've whistleblown. Obviously, councillors are elected. Nobody can remove you other than the electorate.
So I misunderstood that. So what's the relevance of that last? I mean, it's factually correct. I'm trying to see the relevance of that to this.
That's the purpose of the whistleblowing policy, is to protect employees from being removed from paid employment by blowing the whistle on their employer, effectively the person that pays their wages and employs them and has that control over them.
But it does protect. Sorry to interrupt. It also, but it gives councillors who may have done wrong. So people who are having the whistle blown against them.
Yeah.
If I know a senior councillor with an awful lot of power is doing something wrong, they're not covered by this.
No, that's covered by the standards regime. So that would fall under a code of conduct issue for the monitoring officer to deal with.
Are we confident that all the issues are reasonably coterminous? So if you wanted to blow the whistle on something that I'm not going to name names or titles because that'd be invidious, but that a senior officer had done, then you go to this. Are we, and there are things that fall into this in terms of issues and behaviours and things that don't.
Yes.
Are we satisfied to a reasonable extent that the same boundaries exist for the standards process? So in terms of, I've seen that officer do something, I know it falls under this, so I'll go ahead and blow the whistle and see where it goes. Are we certain that all of the things that fall within this process for officers also fall under the standards regime for councillors?
In as far as they can, in terms of the difference that exists between elected members and officers. The standards regime is designed to look at councillor conduct. The council doesn't have any control over what happens to an elected member. There's nothing within the regime that allows that. So it protects as far as it's able within the legislation that exists around council.
I understand that, and this isn't a criticism of Liz by any stretch. That's one of the problems, that part of what we've got here protects the employee, the whistleblower, from any form of retribution. So you complain about a very senior officer, all of a sudden you find yourself sacked or demoted, or if you can link it back to your whistleblowing activity, you are protected and that may not happen to you. Whereas if someone does something to a senior councillor, suddenly Bill isn't chair of the planning committee anymore. Because retribution. And I think that if we're saying that that doesn't exist, or that protection for me as a complaining councillor under the standards regime, I don't have that same protection from backlash, retribution, revenge, call it what you will. Kevin's about to prove that I've only been substituting for a few hours and haven't read my
No, I think there was something that was talking about retribution and vengeful accusations in the report. I can't. I'm struggling to find it.
That might be for. I would be amazed if that didn't exist for staff. My point is that if I then complain about a senior councillor, what protection have I got that I suddenly won't lose my position in the cabinet, chairing a committee, in the same way that you are assured that you won't lose your job or suffer in your workplace as a result of you making a whistleblowing complaint?
I mean, that's between politicians, isn't it? You are put on a committee by your party, but if you would hope that the monitoring officer would investigate it fairly and not and protect you in as much as possible in that process.
So what protection? Clearly, you could protect a member of staff who is being treated with revenge or whatever word we want to put on it. What protection could you give me if I complain about a senior councillor and I suddenly find myself losing my income, my positions?
Well, I would investigate it, obviously, if I was provided with evidence, and wouldn't, it's an option to have your identity remain anonymous, if possible. So that's, thank you.
I know there's no easy answer to it. I'm
No,
not trying to
I
catch
understand,
anyone out.
yeah.
I really am not. It's just exploring all the different permutations because it's a very sensitive topic.
I think it highlights that this is a whistleblowing policy which is for employees, and any employee in any professional sector would have, I would hope they would have a policy like this to protect themselves. But yes, it does also raise the issue that as elected officials or even volunteers in an organisation, they're perhaps not afforded that same level of protection. I've had some more hands up, so I'm going to go to Mrs. Benny first.
It was more sort of sort of building on what you were saying in terms of how would people know, and I'm wondering whether there's probably something in the contractual arrangement, and if not, maybe the contractual arrangement says that contractors or employees of suppliers are responsible for ensuring that their employees are aware of the policies, because it won't be just the whistleblowing policy, will it? It'll be a whole number of other things that they have to comply with.
Yeah, it'll be down to the individual contracts, but I still think it's a point worth.
Yeah, raising and making sure it's
raising.
embedded. Yeah, okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
Councillor Finn.
No, I take on board what you said, Bill. There was a case not long ago, there was a senior member of this council was actually told before a full council meeting that he mustn't speak on a particular subject because it was commercially confidential. However, the aspects that he was talking on regard to specific aspects of a contract or a public document. Therefore, anyone could go there. And he felt unduly threatened and that the rules and protections afforded to councillors aren't clear and above all aren't concise. And that was a senior member, so I can understand people being protected, but it needs to be a two-way protection with elected members as well to cover, because there are issues. There are issues to which members will come into conflict with officers, but there needs to be a clear pathway to what can be said and what can't be said, and above all regard to misleading information. Another typical example is, I don't know whether people are aware of it, a recent freedom of information request has gone against the council because of a redacted document, and the information commissioners come up and said, this is clearly wrong. Well, just because you're told you're wrong internally the council, it doesn't mean necessarily you're wrong when it's independently reviewed. So how you reconcile that, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Finn. Does anyone else have any questions on the whistleblowing policy? Okay, so we're recommended to approve the updates to the policy. Is committee happy to do that? Absolutely. Excellent, thank you. Item number 18, this is the annual information governance statement, and we're joined by John Finch, who's going to present this. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'm going to cover the first part, and then Pete Honeywell is going to come in and cover the cyber aspects. So the headlines on the report are that demand for information, both freedom of information requests and somebody access requests, are increasing year on year, despite a peak we had last year for FOI with a mile away requests. On average, they're going up each year. And we've got some benchmarking included, which shows that this is across the board. It's not just affecting Plymouth, it's affecting councils across the region. The complexity of requests for information, so SARS, court orders, etc., they're also rising, which is increasing demand on the team. However, we have invested in more capacity across the team, and we've got significantly improved compliance with the statutory timescales, and we're definitely seeing this in the last 6 months of this financial year, this calendar year, which is something that we welcome. And the final point I want to make is that we must continue to ensure that staff are trained effectively to minimise data breaches. So that's the summary of the information governance aspect of the report. I don't know if anyone has got any questions before we go into the cyber aspect.
We've got Councillor Finn indicating.
Yeah, hi there. Obviously, there's a lot been made this week over companies actually paying for ransomware attacks. Has the council got a policy on this? In the event of a ransomware attack, would we pay up for the information or would we not?
No, government advice or government recommendations is that we do not pay a ransom because we don't want the UK to become attractive to those type of attackers. So we would take advice from the National Cyber Security Centre and the Cabinet Office, and they would stipulate that we shouldn't pay. They are introducing a law later on this year, hopefully, which will actually prohibit any public authority from paying a ransom.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. It was very interesting. Some companies couldn't afford to pay it, and 100-year-old company had to make 600 employees redundant overnight because he couldn't afford to pay it, lost his business overnight. And they did intimate about a law coming in that would prevent public authority and how far that would run into the private sector as well. So it's nice that we've got a clear policy regarding to that if it was to happen, God forbid.
Thank you. Any other quick questions for John before we hand over to Peter? No? Over to you, Peter, and welcome to Audit and Governance.
Many thanks, Chair. We sort of led into the cybersecurity aspect of this report with the last question, actually. But just to sort of give the committee a sense of what we're seeing at the moment, as noted in the report, we do face a real and serious and actually increasingly sophisticated threat from cyber criminals, a range of different mechanisms for attacking us, from phishing, which is where the attacker might seek to gain access to our systems through user ID and password theft, to ransomware that Councillor Finn has just been describing, and denial of service attacks. And we've been victim of, or we've had attempted attacks of all three of those kinds very recently. So this is a real threat that the council faces on a regular basis. Part of our defence is to make sure that staff, including councillors, actually anybody with access to our systems, is properly trained in how to defend or recognise an attack and then respond in the event that an attack is attempted on them. So hopefully councillors on this committee will recognise the know before training that we use, goes out every month with a couple of bite-sized pieces of advice and guidance on how to protect our assets. Over the last 12 months or so since that's been live, we've seen a significant reduction in our risk profile as a council, which we measure using some of the quizzes and questionnaires that Know Before invite us to participate in. And then the final thing I wanted to mention here really was that the council has set up a cyber board jointly with Delt Shared Services, our IT provider. That board meets on a monthly basis to discuss and review our risk profile and agree investments and implementations of changes that would lead to a reduction in the risks that we face. So I'll pause there with one minor additional note, just to say I'm due to speak tomorrow on a slightly longer briefing to the Scrutiny Management Board about cybersecurity in particular. At that board, I've made provision such that if questions are asked of me that might require me to reveal some level of technical sophistication or anything that might otherwise provide information for a would-be attacker, then we would move into part 2. And I guess the same provision would need to apply here, depending on the nature of the questions that I might get asked now.
Yeah, thank you for that, Peter. Bearing that in mind, any questions? Councillor Rainsford.
Yep. Can I ask you about the know before tests that we undertake? Are you keeping a record of how many employees and councillors take those tests? And is there any way of chasing those people who are simply ignoring the request to do it, to chase them, to encourage them to do it? Because I suspect there are some that see those things come in their inbox and think, I can't be bothered. But actually, having done them repeatedly, the repeated messages I know are getting through to me, and I'm changing some of my habits accordingly. And I just think we need to be able to keep an eye on who's doing it and who's not doing it and chase the ones who aren't doing it.
So, Councillor, you raise a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. I hope it's also not just useful to you in your duties as a councillor, but also in your personal life, because I think the techniques apply just as well there as well to protect ourselves from personal attack as well. So yes is the answer to your question about tracking who is completing their training. We also track who falls for the attempted phishing tests each month. And those people that do take the bait on a phishing test are given specific additional training. But all line managers across the council can see the results of their staff in a know before management dashboard, and that's used. I trust it's used across the board. I certainly know in my team how I use it and how we advise managers across the organisation to use it, which is to make sure that those that fail phishing exercises or aren't completing their training are followed up in a one-to-one as part of the routine performance management arrangements.
I have to say my training has been very useful personally, because I have a husband who's absolutely hopeless with IT and is very liable to open up all sorts of things he shouldn't.
I'm pleased to hear it then.
Any further questions on this item? No?
Yeah.
Oh, Councillor Rainsford.
Can I ask a question about lost items, the lost mobiles, 2 lost laptops from one office in particular? How much reassurance can you give us that any data on those pieces of equipment has been nullified, eaten, whatever you do with it, when something goes missing?
So I can answer this. So our laptops cannot be accessed unless you've got the BitLocker code. And we had an incident probably around 15 years ago when we had the Southway Training Centre, where a number of council laptops were stolen, and the police recovered them very quickly because the perpetrator, who was well known to them, couldn't do anything with them, and they found them stored in his house. So we're really confident that nobody can get into those laptops unless they've got that key. We encourage staff not to write it down anywhere in bags or store it in the bags, etc. The mobile devices are remotely wiped, so they won't have any data on them. And also an addendum to the laptops. In theory, they shouldn't have any data stored locally, and any that is will be encrypted and unable to be accessed without the additional information of the person who logged on and their password.
That's reassuring, thank you. Anything further on this item? No, thank you, John and Peter, and the recommendation is to note the report, so committee will do that. Penultimate agenda item, number 19, is the action log. So this is about being asked to note the log document. Any comments or questions on this one? Nope, doesn't look like it. Which finally brings us on to the work programme for the year. So you've seen the copy of the work programme. And Councillor Stevens.
Yeah, I think we need to have a wash up, for want of a better phrase, of the recent referendum on the directly elected mayor. I understand it wasn't handled under the usual electoral law that many of us, certainly on this side of the table, and you and Lee are used to, but it still did raise a lot of questions. I don't think in this sort of meeting, at this part of the agenda, when people are getting a bit restless, it's useful to go into those questions now. But I do think a session where we can sort of raise some questions that raised our eyebrows would be a good use of time.
So sort of review, self-assessment maybe. What went better if?
Well, and also that there were some unusual things that happened in terms of, yeah, I mean, the idea that we couldn't have this conversation a week ago because we're talking about the referendum in a council building on a live stream. I don't, those sorts of procedures and rules that have been in place, I'd like to drill down a bit more into those. Thanks.
No, I think that's a good proposal. All happy, all in agreement with that? Absolutely. Excellent. Mrs. Benny?
Yeah, just to elaborate on that, it would be really helpful too, because I'm not party to those processes. So what would be really helpful for me is to have it set out, have a timeline set out, and where it matched electoral process that's relevant, or where it didn't, and the rationale why, because some of our questions may be answered with the rationale why, so it might be helpful to have that set out in advance, and that might help direct some of the questions, mightn't it? And I'd have a better feel then as well for what went on and what's going on, if that's all right. Thank you.
So I think it would be most productive to have this sooner rather than later, while it's still within recent memory. So is everyone happy for this to go on the next agenda item?
Yeah.
So for the September meeting? Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. Anything else on the work programme? No? Everyone happy with that so far? Excellent. In which case I will move to close the meeting half an hour early. So thank you for everyone's discipline today. Oh, Councillor Rainsford.
Sorry. Have we got any recommendations that we've got to take forward? There were some earlier on, I think. I can't remember.
I think we dealt with them as we went through the agenda, so they'll be followed up with the minutes. So if there's nothing else, then I will definitely move to close the meeting. So thank you everyone and good afternoon.